Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lori Riley. Welcome to the annual New York City Solar and Storage Workshop. Sustainable CUNY, as we like to say, an objective and trusted university, has traditionally held this workshop on a full day event at the Con Edison Learning Center. With it now being conducted as a webinar, we have our largest gathering to date with over 300 registered. We welcome you all. We take that as a great sign that there will be a continued growth of solar and storage and their related local jobs in New York City. We are nearing 30,000 installations in New York City, and we've come a long way since our first workshop with just a handful of solar installers. Back then, solar production was negligible in New York City due to extensive barriers, including technical and policy, as well as a lack of incentives, standardization, or any cohesion among agencies and utilities. And that has changed dramatically. Sustainable CUNY, under the direction of Tria Case, the University Executive Director of Sustainability and Energy Conservation, formed the New York City Solar Partnership back in 2006, working with the New York City's Mayor Office of Sustainability to develop and implement comprehensive plans for large-scale solar integration and the associated economic development we now see in New York City. And it is all about collaboration. CUNY formalized the Smart DG Hub nearly a decade ago and works daily with the presenters you will hear today. Con Edison, the New York City Department of Buildings, the Fire Department of New York, as well as NYSERDA and a host of others. A few reminders as we get started. If we could put up the housekeeping slide, please, Daniela. So all of you will be muted off camera, but you can submit your questions in the Q&A box that you see there at the bottom. Our ombudsmen are taking note of all of the questions, time permitting, which this is a tight schedule instead of a full day event. We have limited it to a 4-hour event. We'll try to answer these questions live. If not, we will get them answered. We'll forward them to the speakers, and then we'll be posted on the New York Solar Map, and we will let you know. This is being recorded and will be posted along with the slide decks on solarmap.com. And now for today's agenda. We'll be starting off with Sustainable CUNY Ombudsman Daniela and Emily, which I'm sure many of you know and have had one-on-one conversations with technical assistance they provide. We'll move on to Con Edison, and there are 5 presenters there. And then FDNY will join us for the process for solar and storage in New York City. We'll take a 5-minute break at 3:20. Time permitting, we'll answer some questions as we go. And then for the latter part of the afternoon, there we go. New York City Department of Buildings will join us. Barry Stein will be talking about solar and Alan Price about storage. And then we will be joined by the Mayor's Office of Sustainability, and then Tria Case will join us for closing remarks. I will now hand it over to Ombudsman Daniela Leifer and Emily to take us to the next presentation.
Okay, thank you, Lori. My name is Daniela Leifer. I am a DG Ombudsman, as well as the project manager of the Sustainable CUNY Smart DG Hub. And I've been in this role working on our battery-related efforts since early 2017. And as Lori mentioned, I'll be joined by my colleague, Emily Sweeney, who is the Solar Ombudsman with Sustainable CUNY. I'll take a few minutes to introduce the DG Hub program more broadly, and especially the Ombudsman program, which is a key aspect of what we do. And we will also take a short tour through our very extensive library of resources that are available to support developers and installers in the New York City market, just as the audience that we have here today. So we really hope you'll find these resources helpful, especially for those of you who might be somewhat new to the New York City solar and storage market. So as a bit of background, Sustainable CUNY is an initiative within the central administration of the university. focusing both on sustainability and energy conservation within the CUNY campuses, and also with CUNY being a public university, as part of our responsibility to the larger community, this other arm of our work involves the efforts that we do around solar and more recently energy storage, as is illustrated on this slide. And this really involves a great deal of collaborative efforts with city agencies, industry participants, and many other stakeholders. Our role is really primarily as a neutral third-party platform, bringing all the stakeholders together to work out solutions and making sure all the voices are at the table for important decision-making. For just a brief bit of background about our Ombudsman program, Tria Case, the Sustainable CUNY's founder as well as director, initiated the Solar and DG Ombudsman program over a decade ago to help unlock the solar market in New York City early on, before there really was a market here at all. Initially, this was under support from the Department of Energy, and now with state and city support. Our Ombudsman team provides technical assistance to both installers as well as agencies, helping installers with understanding and navigating permitting and other regulatory requirements, and helping AHJs in developing and streamlining these permitting and regulatory processes as they work to keep pace with rapid changes in technology and in the market more broadly. In the last 12 months, our team has responded to 153 requests for assistance, and we are open to any and all questions and issues as you experience them. And with a foot on each side of the permitting process, our ombudsmen have been able to identify challenges, anything from small bumps in the road to flat out barriers, and then work with decision makers and subject matter experts to suggest and implement solutions to streamline these processes. A third key area of our work involves the development of resources, including guidance documents, educational materials, map tools, webinars, and more. And that's what we're going to walk through over the next several slides. But first, I will turn it over to Emily, who will give a little bit more detail about the history of our ombudsman work and provide an overview of our solar-related resources.
Thanks, Daniela. As you can see, New York City had less than 10 megawatts of installed solar capacity as recently as 2012. Today, there are over 250 megawatts installed. Our team of ombudsmen work with the New York City DOB, FDNY, and other authorities on a near daily basis. This growth has been fostered by all the market actions the Smart DG Hub and our ombudsmen have undertaken over the years. You can see it's quite a long list, and I won't name them all, but key actions like the establishment of the ProCert permitting process for solar or the extension of the New York City solar property tax abatement have really helped drive the market growth. This chart also highlights the importance of getting state and local priorities right to support growth in the market and renewable energy targets. Our work continues, and ongoing efforts like this installer training are highlighted at the bottom of the screen. With support from the US Department of Energy, New York State, and New York City in particular, our team leads programs aimed at removing barriers to the large-scale adoption of solar and, since 2012, battery storage in New York City. We expect that this hockey stick growth will soon be duplicated by energy storage as well. A key web-based tool that CUNY developed to help all New Yorkers is the New York Solar Map and portal that you can find at nysolarmap.com. Next slide. Most of you are familiar with the New York State Solar Map, or the New York Solar Map, but using this CUNY-built tool, you are able to find the solar potential of your home or business with the calculator on our homepage. Using the map, you can jump to different counties in New York State for visualizations of solar metrics, as well as utilize our Solar Connect feature to find an NYSERDA participating contractor. Additionally, and perhaps most importantly to our installer audience today, you have access to resources that are collaboratively developed with DOB, FDNY, and others. Next slide. These resources, developed with our partners, cover a number of topics, including permitting, interconnection, zoning, and financing for solar energy. There is a library of reports, guides, and recordings of our past webinars. In fact, we'll be adding a recording of this webinar, along with responses to any questions submitted during today's workshop. Sustainable CUNY recognized the need to compile information regarding community shared solar and launched our Shared Solar NYC Gateway. Next slide. Those with an interest in community solar can visit the site by clicking on the Shared Solar NYC Gateway heading on the New York Solar map. You'll find an interactive map of community solar installations in New York City. Click on each dot and you'll see the location, system size, developer, and if applicable, subscription manager. Subscribers have the option of connecting with subscriber managers who are active in New York City, and host sites can connect with solar developers. There are now more than 50 active systems in the 5 boroughs, although some of those systems limit subscriptions to residents of the buildings they're installed on. It's our plan to have this website serve as a marketplace for matching community solar developers with building owners who are interested in becoming site hosts, and matching utility customers with community solar projects looking for subscribers. I'll turn it back over to Daniela to address our storage resources.
Okay, this and the next few slides comprise most of our primary storage information and resources. This slide here shows our Solar Plus Storage homepage. And as you can see at the top here in the title, you can also get to this page directly via the web link smartdghub.com. And down below the title section are all of the primary projects that we've worked on over the last several years. Our early energy storage work that launched in 2014 focused around identifying and establishing basic baseline information. Where do things currently stand regarding New York City's storage policies, regulatory requirements, what is in place so far and what needs to be put into place, what are the barriers that will need to be addressed in order to grow the market on both a local as well as a more industry-wide level. More recent work initiated in 2017 has dug in more deeply into the specific details, especially around permitting of storage systems. So that leads us to our next slide here, which shows our specific storage resources page. You'll see that this is broken out into a few different categories. So you can find these resources pretty easily. Our flagship New York City energy storage permitting and interconnection guide for lithium-ion batteries lives under this storage permitting page here on the left-hand side. I'm not actually sure if the audience can see my mouse cursor, but the upper left-hand page box here links to the permitting documents page. So you'll find that guide there along with other permitting guidance documents that accompany it. These are guidance documents and checklists designed to help navigate specific components of the overall permitting process. Then our energy storage roadmap and survey documents are in this box in the middle here. And they provide really higher level background information on the New York City storage market, while our case studies and fact sheets available on the upper right-hand box provide educational material about energy storage more generally. We also have some mapping tools relating to storage down here on the bottom left, as well as a page that links to our previous webinars, which Emily just mentioned. And under this last section of additional resources on the bottom right-hand side, we provide links to the latest standards and codes coming from national standards making bodies, including NFPA and UL. And we're always adding new resources as well, with 3 new publications released just recently, which I'll get to in just a minute or two. As mentioned, this is our webinar library available under the resources page, webinar and podcast tab. Whenever we do public facing events like this, as Emily mentioned, we record them, and this is where they will be posted online for those who couldn't attend or just have an opportunity to revisit the material. So in a few days from now, you'll be able to find this webinar linked on this page. We will also be capturing the questions that we received throughout today's presentation, so don't forget to submit those through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And as mentioned, I really hope and encourage you all to take some time to visit our resource library. So to close out, I wanted to highlight our most recent additions. Listed here are 3 developer guidance documents published over the last few months by the DG Hub. These were developed in collaboration with the AHJs in order to provide more thorough and streamlined guidance on specific elements of the overall permitting process. The first one listed here is a checklist that is intended to help developers who are really in the early stages of energy storage project design and planning as they prepare for initial scoping meetings with the New York City AHJs. The second shown here is a document aimed at providing guidance for creation of the Emergency Management Plan, which is one of the required components of the FDNY's permitting package for both medium as well as large battery systems. It provides guidance both on the structure as well as the content that's needed for the Emergency Management Plan. And the third document, which will be released soon, is a checklist somewhat similar to the document above. It's a checklist that provides guidance regarding the content that's needed for a site plan, which is the main requirement for the site-specific installation approval. The installation approval is a key component, again, of the overall FDNY permitting package for large energy storage systems.
Great. And I will jump into our solar section here. So we are addressing opening of the CSS market by working with real estate decision makers through our DOE-supported grant with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and its Solar Energy Innovation Network. CUNY assembled an all-star team of experts from the Real Estate Board of New York, Con Edison, the New York Power Authority, Underwriter Laboratories, and the Electric Power Research Institute to identify the barriers to the wider deployment of both community shared solar and community shared solar plus storage in the city, and to recommend ways of overcoming those barriers. Stay tuned for our upcoming roadmap and EDGE CSS modeling tool. Next slide. Thank you. With that, I'd like to thank you once again for joining us today and hope the content presented during our workshop helps you install more solar and storage in New York City. Please remember, you can reach our Smart DG Hub Ombudsman team with questions or technical assistance requests for both solar and/or storage at smartdghub@cuny.edu. I'm going to welcome our next speaker, Joe White, DG Ombudsman with Con Edison. Joe?
Thanks, Emily, and thank you all for being here this afternoon. We're going to pull up the slides for Con Edison. We have a robust hour ahead to go through a lot of content. So remember to put your questions in the chat and we'll be able to get those to you after the seminar. As Laura said before, Emily said before, my name is Joe White. I'm the Distributed Generation Ombudsman for Con Edison. Next slide, please. Most of you who have been part of this phenomenal opportunity with the Con Edison have seen the growth of DER in our territory. We have currently over 40,000 customers that are subscribed that have DER on their systems and about 500 megawatts, with the majority of that being solar led in the Manhattan area. Today, as we go through the projects and the agenda today for Con Edison during this next hour, we're going to go through interconnection updates, some miscellaneous things that you've probably seen in Power Clerk, and some items at the state level that may impact you or your developments as you go through. We have Cliff Barada, who's a specialist in our DG group, who's going to go through the consolidated billing update. Nikisha Carroll, who's also in our DG Ombudsman group, will go through some hybrid application process updates that you probably have already seen in Power Clerk. We have Suzanne Koch, who's going to go through Connect DER overview, which is an opportunity for a lot of you who are looking at projects in the 50 kW and less range. And then Jim Skillman, who's also, Suzanne is part of our energy services group. And then we have Jim Skillman, who's also part of the DG group, who's going to go through the Power Clerk impact of Connect DER. And we'll walk through that with you in the next hour. As I said before, I'm going to go through some Power Clerk updates with you in the next 20 minutes. Some preliminary screening results, meetings, opportunities for you for developers that are greater than 50 kW in that area. Material modifications process that you've seen at the state level that went live February of 2020. The interim cost sharing order that just got released in late March. And then the upcoming hosting capacity map stakeholder session that's scheduled for mid-May. As we said before, the success of what we're doing together, working with CUNY, working with US stakeholders, is making sure that we're giving information to you in a timely manner. One of the features you've seen in October of 19 is an inquiry system that was part of our Power Clerk feature. It's a little uncommon to see that in Power Clerk, but Con Edison went through the extra programming and working with stakeholders to say, let's implement an opportunity for you to ask questions about your project without ever having to leave the software. So as you go through Power Clerk and you look at the inquiry system that's been there, the ask a question on the top right-hand side, please take advantage of that to where you can get questions answered on your project or multiple projects by your CPM or project manager in a timely manner. There's a business requirement to get those answered within 24 and 48 hours. So that's a quick one-stop shop to get any kind of questions on your projects answered in a timely manner. If you have multiple projects, as it goes through, it'll ask you and prompt you to say which exactly project you're asking for, what are the impacts. And if you don't have anything that's project specific and you just want to get a question from a DER perception, please email us at dgexpert@coned.com and we'll be able to assist you as well. But please take advantage of the inquiry system as a one-stop shop to get questions on your projects. And if it's not project related, more interconnection related, please feel free to use dgexpert.com. One of the items that you've seen in the last few months when it comes to Power Clerk is how we give invoices to the customer. Initially, as a developer, you would want to either contract out how you get invoices from the customer to pay back for application fees in some cases, or Caesar fees, or even construction. Now we've made an update to Power Clerk to where you can select who the invoices go to. So as a developer, when you're in the software, you can actually put that information in under subtitle 3. Again, this was feedback based upon you as a stakeholder telling us you like the flexibility, and we've incorporated that. And you should see that in your updates now as you use Power Clerk. One of the items we want to touch on for those projects that are greater than 50 kW in size that go through a screening process is the preliminary screening analysis results meeting. Most of you know, in the state of New York, there's a standardized screening that happen after you pay your application fee. The application is deemed complete. We go through a series of questions of screens A through F, or A through 3 if it's on the network system. If you aren't able to pass the screens, there's an opportunity to have a meeting with your project manager and sometimes engineering, depending on the level, to understand what you could do to mitigate the project to actually pass the screens and move on to the project and avoid a detailed study. We're going to walk through the next couple of slides. How do you do that in Power Clerk? This is a very important opportunity for developers who are very close to the edge of passing screens, but could mitigate their project or have the capacity to mitigate their project and still get through without a detailed study. As you see on the screen ahead of you, you saw Power Clerk indicated the status of preliminary screening results were delivered. You as an applicant would go in and look for a preliminary results meeting request form in Power Clerk, hit begin to start that form. Once you enter begin, you'll get this opportunity to say, I want to schedule a meeting. At that meeting, that's where you can ask questions about the results and see where you can mitigate your project to either downsize or change some attributes of the project to be able to pass the screens and move through a Caesar. Now, all projects won't be able to pass the screens, but a good number of them could use this opportunity to actually avoid a detailed study to see whether or not the project can move through without a detailed study required. So we urge you to take advantage of this opportunity that's available if you haven't in the past. And those are the steps to do so within Power Clerk. Many of you, again, in the large project range, LDG, or greater than 50 kW, up to 5 megawatts, are familiar with the material modification process. This is a new process that was enabled inside of the SIR starting in February 2020. All of the things on the screen is just more of here's what's in the SIR. The next slide will show you through the process. This is just a uniform way across the state to where all developers and utilities understand what impacts to a project will require a new application and which ones will just need an update to an application and move through the SIR process as it stands. Basically, what happens in Power Clerk is you as a developer request a project modification or material modification. It gets routed to you as a receipt, and it comes to Con Edison, where we'll meet with our engineers, our stakeholders from the project management group, energy services, as well as customer engineering to review what the impacts of that modification will be for that project and other projects, and then decide a ruling. The rulings are done within 10 business days, and you're decided whether it's going to be material, non-material, or invalid based upon the merits of the material modification process. But the cycle of just going through the process is all within Power Clerk, is all self-contained. And we urge you, if you have any questions, please email us at DGExpert or contact your project manager to get more details. But overall, we've implemented this as an update to Power Clerk. So far, it's been running pretty smoothly. We get a number of these that come through the process. If you do have questions about the material modifications process, please reach out to us. But it's a uniform way that the state has enabled utilities and developers to understand when a new application will be required and when just an update will be required to move through the SIR process. One of the couple remaining thoughts we want to give you before we pass on is the interim cost sharing order. Most of you may be aware that there's an interim order that was delivered to the state in late March to go through exactly the cost sharing 2.0 proposal that was filed in October of last year. The first milestone in that order was to review any projects that were impacted by the interim cost sharing order and post them to each utility website by April 17th, as you see on the slide. So phase one has been completed. If you go to coned.com/DG and apply for interconnection, you'll see in our pane where the interim cost sharing order projects have been listed. There are only 13 at this point based on the projects that have gone through CSER, but we expect to add more projects that have qualifying upgrades as we allow more signatures to come out of the CSER process or be completed. The next phase in the interim cost sharing order is on June 15th. There's another milestone to make sure that we can separate the costs from those identified projects of which ones have qualifying upgrades and which ones have non-sharing costs or non-qualifying upgrades. That will be a deliverable that you'll see. If you haven't been part of this discussion and you are a developer who's looking at projects that are greater than 50 kW, I urge you to watch the cost sharing procedure or cost sharing proposal and get up to speed on what the impacts could be to your project and what benefits you can have for your project in the interim. Again, we don't have a full order. We're under the interim order guidelines with the understanding that the full order will be on the future docket sometime in late May or June, possibly. Last but not least, I want to invite you to our hosting capacity stakeholder engagement group. For those of you that develop projects greater than 50 kW or advocates of projects that are 50 kW up to 5 megawatts on distribution, this is an opportunity to get stakeholder feedback on what you want to see in the map when it comes to the data that's contained and new information that you would like to see as a developer. We're embarking upon energy storage, a discussion of a roadmap for a dashboard, as well as other items that are updates to host capacity are all on the agenda for the next call. So if you're not part of the stakeholder session, would like to get engaged between now and May 13th, please click the links on the slide, email at info@jointutiliesofnewyork.org, or email me, Joe White, or dgexpert@connet.com, and we'll get you linked up to the appropriate folks. Thanks again for your time this morning. We're going to turn it over to the next presenter. I believe it's Cliff Barada, who's a specialist in our DG Ombudsman group. Thanks, Cliff.
Thanks, Joe. Good afternoon, everyone. As Joe mentioned, my name is Cliff Barada. I work in our distributed generation group. I'm going to be talking to you today about the consolidated billing or net crediting model for community DG projects. So before we jump into that, I just wanted to level set on the different types of ways that DG projects in New York State can receive compensation. There's 4 different customer types, and they range from your kind of standard, typical residential or small commercial rooftop installation through your larger commercial installations to a couple ways that you can share credits or have virtual crediting. We call it, one of them, remote net metering, which allows you to, one company to have DG located in one location and share the credits with other locations owned by that same account. And then there's community DG, often community solar, that allows customers to subscribe to a solar farm or a large solar array located elsewhere, owned by someone else. So if you click one more time, please. We're going to focus today on community DG. And I just want to mention that all community DG projects in New York State are compensated via the Value of Distributed Energy Resources value stack compensation structure. That's monetary crediting that's based on utility avoided costs, depending on where the project is located and the time of day that the energy is being generated and sent to the grid. Next slide, please. Thanks. So focusing now on community DG, The PSC ordered New York State utilities in the past couple of years to implement something called CDG net crediting as an option for CDG hosts. You may have also heard this referred to as consolidated billing. The reason for that is that projects that participate will enable their customers to receive one consolidated bill rather than two separate bills. So essentially, the utility is performing the billing services on behalf of the CDG hosts. As I'll walk through in the subsequent slides, you'll see how the utility actually collects the subscription fees that currently are being managed independently, and then remits payment to the CDG host. So I'll get into that shortly. And then one note on timing. Net crediting is not yet implemented or effective for Con Edison customers. Con Edison is targeting later this quarter of this year to begin enrollments for net crediting projects. Next slide, please. There are three main entities I'm going to talk about today that are critical for a successful community DG project. There's the electric utility, the host, also known as the sponsor, and the satellite or the subscriber. So the utility is going to make sure that the interconnection is safe and that the customer is billed for any usage and credited for any export of energy. The host is the utility customer that actually owns and allocates credits for the CDG program, and then the subscriber or satellite are the individual customers that receive those credits. Next slide, please. So how does it work today? Currently, Con Edison will receive a allocation list or a list of percentages that the CDG host wants to allocate to each subscriber. So that's, you can see number one, the host sends allocation list to the utility. The utility would then calculate the credits or the value of the credits generated by the DG and allocate the credit to the individual subscribers as indicated by the host. And then separately, in a separate transaction, the CDG satellite would have to pay the host essentially for access to those credits. It's often referred to as a subscription payment. So if the utility calculates $100 of credits for each satellite, then maybe the CDG host would ask the satellite to pay something like $90 for those credits. So CDG host makes $90, but the satellite still saves 10. And important here is two separate transactions. In the future, on the next slide, yep, this slide, thank you. We're moving towards this net crediting model with consolidated billing. So the first step is largely the same, except that the CDG host would tell the utility what the savings rate is. How much does the satellite actually get to keep? And then when the utility in step 2 calculates the value of the credits for each subscriber, they will apply that savings rate. So using the same example with $100 in credits allocated to each satellite, if the host said they want a 10% savings rate, that means that the satellite would only see that $10 or 10% of $100 on their bill. The remaining money, Con Edison will actually send directly to the CDG host, eliminating the need for a separate transaction between the host and the satellite. What's important here is notice $1 is missing, and that's the 1% utility billing fee. It's essentially an administrative fee that Con Edison collects for using this program. Next slide, please. So just to kind of summarize, this net crediting model allows us to move from 2 bills to 1 consolidated bill. That highlights one of the major benefits of this program is that it's going to be simpler for customers and hopefully make it easier for all of you to find customers who enroll. There's less friction. A few other benefits of this is that since Con Edison is collecting, or utilities in New York are collecting the money in the form of reducing the bill credit, there's a lot less risk taken on by the CDG hosts or the owners. So that could open things up to less creditworthy customers, or there's just a generally a lower risk of to the developer because they don't have to worry about non-payments. Next slide, please. A few other things I want to leave you with before I pass it off are a few additional rules. So within each program, there's a savings rate that will apply to all satellites. If you are a CDG program administrator or you have multiple CDG projects, you can have different savings rates for different projects, but everyone within a certain project will have the same savings rate, that 10%. There is also the option for a host to designate one satellite as an anchor satellite. So we often see that maybe the majority of the credits are allocated to residential customers, but then there's a big commercial customer who takes up to 40% of the credits. So you can actually designate them as an anchor satellite and exclude them from the net crediting program if you wanted to build them separately and have some separate arrangement and avoid the 1% administrative fee. Satellite savings rates have to be at least 5%, and obviously can't be more than 100%. And we're going to be posting more detailed rules and procedures as they become available, and we'll post that on our Con Edison website. And finally, as we get closer to enrolling projects, Con Edison is going to be proactively reaching out to CDG hosts, so people we know who have programs already or who are in the queue to interconnect CDG projects. Thank you very much. I'm going to actually turn it over now to Nikisha Carroll, another member of our DG group, who's going to talk about several process improvements we've made in PowerClerk, specifically for hybrid applications. Thank you.
Thank you, Cliff. Good afternoon. As Cliff mentioned, my name is Nikisha Carroll, and I'm a project specialist in the DG Ombudsman team. And I'll be talking about enhancements that were made in our interconnection application with respect to hybrid applications. So in November, we made updates in how you would apply via our portal. Our aim really was to enhance customer experience and was able to streamline the application process for all SRI technologies. So if you now looking to apply for one or more distributed energy resource, you can submit that in one application. So for those who have already applied since our enhancement, you'll notice we have step-by-step questions that would guide you through the application process. So whether you apply in the small DG or program or in our large program, you would see that new SIR application button for less than or equal to 50 kilowatts for a small program or greater than 50 for a large program. So during that same time, we updated our hybrid application. We also made some enhancements to the new electric service, new account and meter process. So if you're installing a DER under the SIR process and require a new service or meter as per your design, you would no longer would have to go into Project Center to apply for a new service request. Everything that is now handled under the project, this one project case that you applied for. So also on page 1 of the application, you would also be asked to identify if you have an existing service at the site. And this is where you would be asked a couple of questions, series of questions following up, such as the account number, the meter number, or the electric service there for that specific service. It's important to note that these questions are asked even if you're looking to install behind a new meter. So just quickly, as Joe previously mentioned, we recently made another update for the applicant to be able to choose who the invoice would be sent to, whether to the customer or to the contractor, which is listed on the application. So just wanted to bring that to your attention once again about the update that we had. So on page 4 really is where a lot of the information is that we were asking, where you indicate whether you had an existing DER dispute generation there on site. And if you do say yes, there are a couple of additional questions that you ask to determine to see what you're looking to do, whether to increase the size of the existing DG or add a new DG or both, right? So that is also asked on page 4. And then also where you indicate how many new DER technologies you're looking to apply for in this application. So it's really important to note here that if you're looking to get PTO individually, you would want to apply separately. But if you're looking to get a PTO issued for all the technologies at one time, we have you can do up to 3 DERs in one application process. Well, we thought this would be a good time to remind folks about the Appendix K and really what it's used for. So it's used to improve the energy storage interconnection experience. It's also used to identify if it's a standalone battery or a hybrid project, and then most importantly, to collect data and operating characteristics for the battery. What it's not used for is to signify market participation or dual participation, which is an pending feature. So if you are doing an hybrid application with energy storage, you have 4 possible configurations that you could go through, and we wanted to talk about them quite quickly today, but to highlight the fact that you have an option A, where energy storage would charge strictly from the eligible DG. So absolutely no charging whatsoever from the grid if you're looking to do your configuration or design for an option A. Then for option B, you can charge both from the grid as well as your DG, but you cannot export anything to the grid from the energy storage. So you put some things in place to be able to avoid any sort of export from the energy storage to the grid. Options C and D are pretty similar in that you can charge from and export to the grid, but in option C, this is where you would have customer load, and in option D, this is where you would have no customer load and it's netted out. So where would you identify which options you would want to do that? And you would do that on page 4 of our application, where you could see whether you have hybrid options A, B, C, or D, and then as for your configuration, you would then do your identification there. So now I will turn it over to Susan Koch, who will then speak to us about Connector.
Thank you, Nikisha. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Suzanne Koch, and I work for the Distributed Energy Services Department here in Con Edison. And today I'm going to be explaining to you a new and exciting program called Connector. Next slide. So today I'll explain to you what Connector is, how the installation is performed, the current existing solar workflow, the Connector improved workflow, some of the benefits of the program, and then finally the program contacts. So what is Connector? Connector is a device that could be installed directly into the meter pan, which allows for solar interconnection. As you can see in the illustration on the top right, a typical solar installation requires the contractor to bore a hole into the customer's home and connect directly into the breaker panel. On the bottom right, you can see that the solar can be directly tied into the meter pan by using this connected device. Once installed and approved, Con Edison will receive DER production and consumption data from the connected device. The cost for this product is covered by Con Edison, and we will install it for you. Additionally, connectors come with built-in breaker for your safety. The built-in breaker is sized to the installer's needs. Next slide, please. So how does this device get installed? Once the contractor submits all of the preliminary documentation and it's approved, Con Edison will send out a meter and test crew to exchange the meter if necessary and install the connected device directly into the meter pan. This allows for the installer to tie into the top terminals of the connected device without needing a meter unlock or a line side tap. The power will flow on the customer side of the Con Ed meter directly to the breaker panel without ever having to drill into the home. By using this device, it will help to avoid costly circuit breaker panel upgrades. Next slide, please. So as most of you are familiar, the Con Edison workflow for the small DG solar installation workflow is a preliminary document review. We submit to you the system design approval letter. We issue a meter order out to Meter and Test to have it installed for you in conjunction with you building and testing your system. Once you submit your final documents, we review them, and then we will submit to you the permission to operate letter. Next slide. The difference with the new connector enhanced process is that we're issuing the meter order and the connector device installation prior to the system design approval letter. So once you receive the system design approval letter, you'll know that the connector is installed and it's ready for you to complete your work. Next slide, please. So as you can clearly see, there are many benefits to joining into the connector program. First, the time savings. Installation times are reduced, which results in faster permission to operate onto the system. Second, the cost savings. At this time, the device is free, and you can potentially avoid any costly equipment upgrades. Additionally, it's a safer installation. Instead of having to drill through the customer's property, you can quickly and safely install this directly into the meter pan. And finally, by using this device, it helps to comply with our social distancing guidelines. You never have to enter the customer's home, which helps avoid any close contact and potential exposure to COVID-19. Next slide, please. Okay, so on this slide, I've provided you with the contact information for project eligibility and for any technical questions if you choose to look into this program. Thank you for your time, and I'm going to hand it over to Jim Skillman to give you some more information on how to process a connector.
Thanks, Suzanne. You can go to the next slide, Nikki. For those of you that probably know me, I've been around for 8 years now in the DG space in the DG Ombudsman's office. I'm Jim Skillman, project specialist with the DG Ombudsman Group, and work intimately on installing the connector into our normal workflow that Suzanne just described. So again, just to kind of hit at that real process change with the connector is we bring that application approval and the connector install up front before you build the system. Next slide, Nikki. So the biggest thing that you're going to see as an installer is we've allowed the connector request to move right into our normal application. Those of you that may have worked with us in the past on the connector program, there was separate emails, there was separate forms to fill out. All of that's been integrated right into our actual project application within Clerk. So the additional fields that you're going to see for the connector request will pop up once you've met the certain sort of incoming requirements, and those requirements are listed out here. Once you've received connector on training on the connector itself, will be added to our developer dropdown. So once you put your name in there, you'll be approved for using the connector. The hybrid application selector, it's important that you choose only one DER technology, that being solar, and that your nameplate capacity of that solar system is 15 kW or less in order to use the connector. Provided those 4 gates are hit, you'll be able to see all of the connector information display later on in the application. Next slide. Next slide, Nikki. Thank you. So some of the other changes, once you've got all those project-specific items in there and the connector fields display, the first thing you're going to see is a reminder of the connector requirements list, which is shown on the right-hand side. All of those will be talked about within the installer training that you receive prior to being approved to use the connector. So I won't go into detail on them here, but you can kind of see the requirements for using a connector on that right-hand side. Now, again, connector isn't a requirement. So if you want to use the connector, we first asked, are you requesting to use a connector for this interconnection? Once you say yes, the remaining fields pop up where we ask what is the amperage of the connector breaker you'd like to use. For the program right now, we have 4 sizes that are standard sizes, 20 amp, 30 amp, 40 amp, and 60 amp breaker versions. If you need anything other than that, there's going to be a significant time delay, as those are our standard devices right now, and we can talk about that separately through the connector@coned.com email address. The additional fields that you're going to see, the biggest one there is the signed connector customer agreement. Every customer needs to sign one of these so that they're aware of what their responsibilities are and where the utilities responsibilities are for the connector. And then last but not least, a picture of the meter pan. In our PSC order to use the connector, we were granted only ring type meter pans. So that picture really helps us to see that it is a ring type meter pan, as well as making sure that the meter pan itself doesn't have excessive rust and is properly attached and has clearances for the connector. So once all those fields are filled out and you submit your application, from there, the internal work for Con Edison begins. Suzanne described the application review. Once that application is submitted, you're going to see a connector request received email come out from Clerk, giving you the basic things that you had on your connector request, just to make sure that we've got it right. Then we're going to go through, in addition to our normal review, we're going to verify that the connector that you've requested is correct for the one that you're trying to put on the customer service, that the voltage is correct, that the breaker amperage makes sense with the size of the system that you're requesting. And again, we are going to review that meter pan picture to make sure that it looks like a connector can be installed and that it's in good shape. Again, Suzanne touched on, once we give you that application approval, that system design letter will not come out from CPMS. What we are going to send you is a connector request pending installation from Clerk. That's essentially going to say, we've got all of your documents have been approved, and we're now going to go out and install that connector for you. And in Clerk, you'll see the new status of documents approved, pending connector installation, so that you know that we are actually going out to do that. Once our meter techs head out to the field to do the meter work itself, every connector will end up with an AMI meter after we're all done. So if you have an AMI meter beforehand, we'll take it off, put in the connector, and then put that AMI meter back on. If it's one of the older meters in place, we're going to take that off and upgrade it to the new AMI meters, which really help with solar billing because they give us very granular detail into the import and export of power. So one of the things that's very important, because we are going to be taking off that meter, is that we do schedule with the Con Edison customer to make sure that they understand that a short duration outage is going to occur, right? Those meters act as the bridge between the Con Edison service and the customer's breaker box. So when we pull that off to install the connector, power will go out for a short period of time. We are going to provide you contact on the WR, the work request itself, so that if there's ever any issues with getting to the home or getting to that meter pan, your number will be on there as well, just as it has in the past for all other meter orders. Now, once the installation is reported complete, all of the automation work that we've done recently to upgrade the connector into our normal process this is where it really pays off. The instant that that field crew signs off on meter request complete and customer back in power, instantly Clerk will be updated. That system design approval will automatically be sent by CPMS. We'll send you a separate email saying your connector installation is complete. And then immediately, as soon as that crew is done, you can begin your installation. Next slide, Nikki. So if you've installed with us in the past, you know that once those are out in place, your job that can then begin as far as building the system and bringing those leads into the connector itself. Now, once that's done and you've gone and you've turned on the breaker on the bottom so that you get the power to your system and you've tested your system in accordance with the SIR and everything is looking good, normally you go into Clerk and submit that construction complete, submit final documents form. Right on that form, we're going to ask you for a few more things that are connector related. The Con Edison serial number on the right-hand side of the unit where that nice looking gentleman is looking, is going to be located a 9-digit numerical serial number. That really helps us out with verifying that you got the proper unit installed and there wasn't a mix-up anywhere in the field. Also, the connector's serial number, that is located just below the Con Edison serial number. That one begins with an S and ends with a -CON. If you could provide that to us as well, that'd be great. But really, the Con Edison serial number is the more critical of the two. The picture of the completed connector, one, we want to make sure that our guys are doing a good job of putting everything in, but also we love to show off what you've done. And so once everything is installed and you take a picture of that unit, it makes us happy that these guys are going in, and we can start to report that back to NYSERDA, who is helping to sponsor the program. And then last but not least, the connector feedback. If you have any issues, if you have any suggestions for improvement, we want to know about it, because we are starting back up again, and we'd love to make this as seamless as possible and as easy and useful to you as possible. So the other nice feature of the automation is once that form comes in, there's nothing standing in the way between you and that permission to operate. So shortly after your final documentation is reviewed and approved, that PTO letter will come out. So that's it for the Con Edison portion of the program. We're going to hand it back over to Lori Riley, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. It's nice to see your face again. You've been around, I think, almost as long as Tria and I. I'll ask the Con Edison team to come back on camera, because it's now time for, thanks to the efficiency of your quick presentation, we have time for Q&A. Every presenter's favorite part of presentation. So we'll start off here with a question regarding option C and D. If you can dive in a little bit deeper into those options and what netted out means. And then there's a follow-up to this, but we'll start with that. Feel free to unmute yourself and jump right in, Con Edison team.
Cliff and Nikisha, you want to take that one?
I can start, and then Cliff can back me up on here. So for the option C, this is where we would require those separate meters. So for you to have that, we wanted to have a separate meter for the ESS, for the energy storage, so that we can identify what exactly is being imported and exported to the battery itself, so that we could take that and net that out with what the load is, how the customer has, and what is being fed by the battery. So that whatever gets exported is just what we're looking at is the green electrons, basically, for the going out to the net or to the grid. So Cliff, you want to jump in and help me with anything that I may have missed for the option C piece?
All right, well, maybe we'll come back to that portion. I'm sure you guys have a side text going on to say, Cliff, jump on.
Yeah, he may be away. So it's a netting of the green versus the brown electrons, and making sure that the ESS is importing or exporting. How is that impacting from the grid? So we'll get that in writing and send it back out as a follow-up to the question. But it's supposed to be the netting of the green versus brown electron debate that's been held at the state level, and like Nikisha said, also the load. So we want to make sure that as we have the meter configurations for those, that you're the merits of those hybrid options.
Thank you very much, Joe. Was there something else?
And then just to focus on the option D pieces, where this energy storage will be installed before the meter itself, so no load for the customer. So that's where we talk about the differences between the option C and D configurations.
Okay. And then a follow-up question that was in the same box, I don't know if it exactly is connected, is does the ESS system get its own Con Ed meter?
So for configuration C, it would, because then we want to be able to identify. And then, so therefore, this is where those different configurations would go, and we will look at them. So then, yes. But we will also follow up in more details with the questions, as well as probably some pictorials if we could have that as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and just on to what Keisha is saying, the developer is driving what options that they're trying to allocate for. So based upon what they submit to Con Edison, what's in their Appendix K, which is their operating characteristics of that ESS component, we're going to look at the design and review and whether or not it meets those hybrids. So it's not as much as what Con Ed is dictating versus what hybrid option availability the customer is asking for and if they're meeting that. So that'll be a dialogue based on a case-by-case basis on each project. But you as a developer actually submit if you're looking at hybrid option A, B, C, or D. But as Nikisha said before, some certain configurations will require a certain metering configuration based upon what you're asking for. And if you can't meet that, there are other options that are available based upon whether or not that ESS is charging from the grid or not charging from the grid, exporting or not exporting.
All right, thank you. A question now regarding consolidated Con Ed billing. And the question is about the non-10% customers who did PPAs with the community solar project. So what about those customers?
I don't understand that question. For Con Ed billing only, what about non-10% customers did PPAs? Unless someone else on a DG group, we'll probably just have to take that one back or request that sender email us at dgexpert@coned.com to get more information. But that one's a little different from other forms that I've heard. Again, unless someone else from the DG team can answer.
Anyone? We have lots.
Nikki, I don't know if it would help to go back to the slide, but I think the 10% was in our example on slide 20 of our presentation. It was essentially the subscriber savings rate. And that was sort of the ballpark number that we used to help figure out what would be paid to the subscriber versus what would be paid back to the utility versus what stays with the allocation from the CDG satellite. So I think each one of those 10% is going to be sort of specific to which satellite customer you're talking about. There you go. So this is just an example of one particular savings rate for the CDG host to the individual satellites. So for each satellite, a similar calculation will be done based upon their savings rate and how much of the overall CDG host allocation they've been given. I hope that helps answer the question.
This is Cliff. I'll add to what Jim said that that savings rate will be the same percentage across all satellites for a given CDG program, but different programs can have different savings rates. So yeah, again, not really sure where the PPA fits in, but hopefully that does help, and definitely feel free to follow up with some more specifics and we can address that question offline.
At dgexpert@coned.com, you can email us. We definitely love to follow up with you regarding that question, whoever that participant was. dgexpert@coned.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And we would also want to get the full measure of that answer that we can post up on our website along with your presentation. So I'll move on here to a question regarding the grounding. How is the grounding done in the Connect DER? Does it connect to the water ground? Does DOB Electrical approve of this?
So I will say that the internals of the connector actually connect to our system neutral, as well as the ground within the meter pan itself. So when Con Edison comes out to do the install, all of that is sort of taken care of from there. As far as the DOB portion of that, yes, we went through a DOB approval process for the equipment, and they have signed off on the connector itself.
Okay. So can you explain why the Connect DER option is not available for a hybrid inverter use case?
Right now, we have an approval from a PSC order for solar, and unfortunately, solar only. I think all of us on the Connect DER program want to get that expanded. We see an excellent use case for electric vehicles. We see an excellent use case for residential residential battery additions to existing solar. So our next move, once the program kind of gets up and running, is to go back to the PSC and ask for those additional things, which could include adding on that additional hybrid case of solar and battery.
We're going to stick with this Connect DER topic here. Question is, where in Power Clerk is the Connect DER option selected? That's pretty specific.
Specifically, it'll be on the distributed generation page, which I think is page 4, but don't quote me on that. Wherever you normally put in your size of your system and what type of system you're putting in, once that information is in and those other 4 criteria are met, the developer, the technology, the size, all of those Connect DER fields will appear below the technology and the size that you input. So I believe it's page 4, but don't quote me on that.
Okay, thanks, Jim. And there are several questions about the maximum size for Connect DER. Can you please confirm?
Yes, the maximum size of the Connect DER is 15 kW, 15 kW, and that's based upon the rating of the device itself.
And does that device come with holes pre-drilled to attach conduit, the Connect DER?
It does not, but part of the solar, the training that Connector Inc. Gives to installers prior to being approved for the project is how to do it. It's difficult to see, but on the side of the upper housing unit is actually a guide. And at the top of the rounded guide is where you drill the hole for that conduit. So they've made it as sort of as easy as possible without becoming a knockout, because we do put that connector out into the field before the installer starts their install into the unit. So it has to be watertight in that interim period. So no knockouts or easy access holes, but they've made it as quick and easy as possible with that drill guide.
Okay. And can a contractor do, I'm assuming the word is combine interior meter pan with Connect DER meter collar?
I'm not 100% sure of what the question is asking.
But
I will say,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Can contractor do interior meter pan with Connect DER meter collar?
So external,
Oh, okay.
Can you do external meter set versus internal meter set, Jen?
Yes, you can do internal meter sets, meter pans as well. External is sort of where we did our bread and butter, but that same benefits from avoiding the customer's breaker pan upgrades. You get the same benefits whether it's an internal meter pan or an external meter pan from the connector.
Okay. And does that customer have access to the Connect DER data?
At this time, not directly through connector.com, but typically the same data that we get from the connector is provided by the solar installers to their customers through whatever web portal that they have. That same inverter data.
I think we're moving off the connector questions now. If a customer enrolled in community solar under net crediting billing doesn't pay their Con Edison bill, does Con Edison still remit payment to the CDG host for that customer? Did you follow that?
Yes, I can take this question. The way that would work would be similar to any other Con Edison customer that is late on their bill or not paying their bill. So if the customer is late on their bills, at a certain point, there are rules in place that customer's account might be suspended, or there would be other implications. And at that point, that account would no longer be eligible for a CDG program, but it's really treated the same way as any Con Edison account. So as long as it's a valid Con Ed account, then we would still remit payment.
Okay. And can you verify how frequently the CDG subscribers can be replaced?
Yes, so that's the same as it works today. New allocation lists can be sent every month, so you could change the allocation amounts or who participates on a monthly basis.
Is there a guide we can point the team to on our website for that?
Definitely, yeah. We have that linked on one of the slides. And if you go to coned.com/DG, I believe it's on the rates and tariff page, there's a community DG guide that gives all of the program rules. And there is also one specifically for net crediting. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
So can the PV production be counted as 100% export? This is relating to the value stack, even if there's an on-site load?
So that's all going to depend on how the PV is connected. Export, for the purposes of generating any type of value stack credit, whether it's community solar or a different type, export is defined as energy going out to our grid. So if the solar is grid connected, not co-located with load, then all the generation will be export. If there is load co-located, then it's not, because some of that generation is going to be serving the load.
Now here's a question that's come up a few times. We've heard the community credit is close to being filled up. Do you know the status of where it is now, and what can installers and developers expect to happen with that in the future?
Yeah, I believe we are getting close to that 350 megawatt cap. As far as I know, there is no decision on extending that or adding additional megawatts. So you can continue to check the CDG tranche report, which Con Edison publishes twice a month. And yeah, I can't really speculate on what's coming next.
Okay. Do you know if any of the community DG resources are available in Spanish?
I'm not aware. I know sorry, go ahead, Joe.
I guess just to make sure I understand the question, is it the guidelines that we have on our website, are those available in another language, or is that a different type of question, I guess, just to make sure we understood the question better?
That's all I have.
Okay.
So maybe answer it both ways.
If that person can email us, okay, they just responded in guidelines. Okay, so Cliff, I don't believe we have that in any other language on our website. It's all in English, correct?
Correct.
DG guidelines, yeah, I believe it's only in English this time.
Okay. And what are the additional considerations for interconnection when adding storage to a site with solar? That sounds like a big question.
You might repeat it one more time for us, Laurie.
What are the additional considerations for interconnection when adding storage to a site with solar?
A couple of things to make sure as a developer this size. If you're in the less than 50 kW program, something so similar to like a Powerwall, that's a different aspect. When we look at the larger projects, greater than 50 kW, if you have existing solar and you're adding energy storage, making sure you understand hybrid options that you're soliciting for. As Nikisha went through the Appendix K, making sure the operating characteristics that you're vying for are very clearly laid out and you understand what those impacts could be. Other considerations to make sure if you come in as a brand new hybrid project, are you looking at getting the entire project online at the same time, meaning the solar or other DG plus energy storage? If so, just make sure you understand that until you get both DERs functional, you won't get permission to operate. So maybe consider going in with your first DG project and energy storage separately in case there's supply chain issues, as we saw last year in the market and industry. And then you also have the permitting impacts that you have regarding trying to get energy storage permitting in New York State, that you have to make sure your timeline for DER is inclusive of that. So those are the things to be considered. If you have other questions, please call us or email us at dgexpert@connet.com, and we'll be able to sit down and go through some of the other, at least lessons learned and best practices we've seen from those types of projects.
Okay. The next question is, what if satellites have an ESCO that is higher? I have to jump in here because as Daniela mentioned, we're working on a major project with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and we are using different verbiage than satellite and host as you are. So we're going to have to all get on the same page so as not to confuse the industry. on that. But that's just a little side note, something we'll have to talk about. But the question is, what if satellites, as you have described in your presentation, have an ESCO that is higher?
So the way that the credits work is that they're all monetary credits. It doesn't have to do with per kWh, or it doesn't have to do with kilowatt hour credits. So it's just monetary credits. So if a system generates $1,000 in credits overall, and you give everyone 10%, they just have a $100 bill, a $100 credit they can apply against their bill, against the electric charges. And if there's $100 in electric charges, it'll reduce it. If they have fewer than $100 in electric charges, they'll now have a bank. So it's pretty agnostic to whether you use an ESCO or not, and whether or not what the ESCO rate is.
Okay. Is a 1% fee charged on a host account, e.g. that receives 40% of the project's bill credits, or only for the satellite accounts? So I think we're talking about the anchor subscriber versus the other subscribers.
Yeah, so a host could decide to have one satellite that is exempt and outside of the net crediting program, and for that one satellite, they're billed separately using the same model that's used today in a separate transaction. So the utility we're not doing the billing for them, so there is no administrative fee that would apply.
Okay, and I think we've got time for one more question here. Well, that's a follow-up. To clarify, can the monetary credits be credited to offset all of their bill, or is there a limit of credits based on monthly kilowatt hour usage, which I think you sort of just answered, but you can clarify that.
Yeah, it's a monetary credit against any electric charges on the Con Edison bill.
Okay, and who decides the cap for community solar?
That 350 megawatts was a cap established by the Public Service Commission. And just to be clear, it's not a cap on community solar. Once that's reached, you can keep doing community solar projects. It is a cap on the community credit, which is a large portion of the compensation today.
That's a really important clarification. Well, thank you very much to the entire Con Edison team who has been working for 15 years with the CUNY team and the ombudsman to help us unlock this market. And we really appreciate their time and working together with us. And thank you for all of your efforts today. And we will be circulating these questions from Con Edison to Con Edison, to all of their team. And we will get the answers in writing that we didn't get to here, or we'll probably put them together regardless, post them on the site. So thank you very much to the Con Edison team. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Good afternoon.
And now we're going to transition over to the Fire Department of New York, who's been, a terrific partner for CUNY and for all of the work that we've been trying to do, working very hard to make sure that we can open up this market in a safe way and determine together what needs to be done to move the market forward. So I'd like to welcome right now John Ingenito. He's the supervisor for Rooftop Access Unit for FDNY. He's going to talk about the updates to the FDNY application process for solar. Thank you very much, John, for joining us and for your time today. And if you unmute yourself, there we go.
Oh, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to confirm everyone can hear me clearly?
The floor is yours.
All right, excellent. Thank you for having me. I'm going to share my screen so we can get this presentation started. Give me 1 second. All right. I just want to confirm everyone can see the slides clearly?
Yes, thank you very much, John.
Okay, great, excellent. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Gino. I'm the supervisor of Rooftop Access Unit for Technology Management. Today, I'm going to be discussing, rooftop access. Specifically, we're going to go into the Fire Max and operations. We're going to discuss a little about the 2014 Fire Code, specifically FC 504.4 and FC 512. And then we're going to go into some common non-compliant installations, solutions, and how to file. So we're starting with biometrics and operations. There's a saying, nothing shall deter the member assigned the roof position from carrying out their assigned duties. These assigned duties are, and we'll go into them later, but a little later, but they are, you know, rooftop rescue, doing ventilation, checking for anyone who might be need assistance. As you can see in this picture here, you have what is called a rope rescue. That's basically the firefighter being lowered down to rescue someone from a window. So the rooftop position is an extremely important position. Some of the requirements for the rooftop position are perimeter searches. And this is the firefighter will search the front to rear and side to side of the rooftop. They're going to be looking over the edges of the rooftop. They're going to be looking to see if people are hanging outside of windows. Is there smoke coming out of windows? Is there smoke coming out of doors, vents, hatches? You know, they're going to be checking to see if there are hot spots on combustible rooftops and a slew of other things. And they're going to transmit this information to the incident commander. The incident commander is the chief on site who is not only directing those on the rooftop, but also the other firefighters on the ground, in the building, the ones who are doing the hose operations. So he's basically coordinating all these firefighters to get this fire under control. And it's incredibly important that they have the most up-to-date and accurate information possible. And the final thing, one of the final things they do is rooftop ventilation. So they do this by opening the bulkhead doors, breaking upper level windows, skylights, opening hatches, and cutting the roof. And rooftop venting is very key in the early stages of fire operations for relieving hot gases and smoke. This will increase the survival time of those evacuating and those who may be trapped or unconscious. It makes searching and rescue operations far more efficient and effective, increases the efficacy and effectiveness of hose operations and extinguishment, and limits the horizontal spread. When we're talking about limiting the horizontal spread, it's especially critical sometimes in H-type buildings. You can see in the top right, sometimes the fire itself is getting a little out of control. It's hard to, it's just burning too hot or spreading too quickly and they're having trouble controlling it. So they'll cut a trench in the floor of the building to isolate that wing of the building to keep it from spreading and destroying the entire building. It's essentially triage. And the other picture just shows the bottom firefighters who have cut a trench after the fact. So that's a bit about the operations they'll be performing on the rooftop, just to give you a taste of what they do. Now we're going to go into the actual fire code itself. So the 2014 fire code is effective as of March 30th, 2014. It affects buildings that are 100 feet in height or less and have a slope of 20 degrees or less. This includes all rooftops under that particular bin. That includes the rooftop setbacks. And here's a little diagram. So all rooftops here in this little diagram would be required, not just the main rooftop, but also the lower rooftop. If you have a rooftop, we get a question sometimes like, hey, I have a building that's 150 feet high with a lower rooftop at 30 feet. Do I have to comply with FC 504.4? No. Yes and no. The upper rooftop, the main rooftop that's at 150 feet, doesn't trigger the code, but the lower rooftop, the one at 30 feet, does trigger the code and will be required to fully comply with the code. So, what is the code? What are the requirements? The first thing is we need to get onto the rooftop itself. So we need perimeter access. Every 12 feet of frontage width requires 6 feet of open access. There can be no more than 12 feet of obstructed rooftop area between any two distinct openings, perimeter access openings. The pattern will obviously depend on the size of the building and the shape of the building. Obviously, a very simple square or rectangular building, it's very easy to determine the pattern, but things like H-types or buildings that are slightly curved may have to have a little bit of a different pattern. And the access openings are only calculated along accessible exposures. I know this is a question CUNY had mentioned to us that a lot of people have. What are the accessible exposures that you have to provide perimeter access on? And it includes everything from the side streets, parking lots, basically anywhere a truck can drive. We've been asked, well, what if the building's set back and they have some trees or foliage there? Does that mean I'm exempt? No. No. Generally, if the truck, we believe the truck can reach it in any way, shape, or form, we will say you must provide permanent access along that exposure. That includes parking lots, that includes driveways. I know sometimes they say, oh, we have a narrow driveway, can it fit down there? That's a question you can always ask us. I'll generally say, usually just assume that you need to provide access along that exposure. If you have a question, you're more than welcome to come to the fire department and we will work with you and let you know, yes or no, do we need access along that exposure? So, permanent access openings, now the permanent access openings themselves need to be a minimum of 6 feet in each direction. That means 6 feet wide, 6 feet deep. They must connect to a clear path. Fences shall not obstruct the permanent access landing, meaning you cannot have a fence within those 6 feet because how is the firefighter going to land? They're not going to land onto that fence. You can't have fences between the clear path and the permanent access opening, but they must be they must have gates. The gates must be 3 feet wide, inward swinging. They can be secured by a padlock. You know, if you want to protect anyone who's on the rooftop or young children, they can be secured with a padlock or chain, but that must be cuttable by a standard bolt cutter. So now you know you need the access landing. Where do you take the measurements from? The measurements are taken from the inside face of the parapet wall. You do not include the parapet itself. Even if you have a very wide parapet, you're like, well, you could step on this parapet, it doesn't matter. The parapet is not included as part of the calculation. Also, raised and decorative parapets can be considered to be obstructions to the permanent access. Non-standard 42-inch high parapets, those that are much taller than that, are considered to be obstructions, even though maybe you could get over them and onto the rooftop. The firefighters don't just have to get onto the rooftop, they also need to be able to evacuate the rooftop in case, you know, the fire begins to spread, the structure beneath the rooftop structure begins to collapse. They need to also be able to get off quickly. So really high parapets or decorative parapets that are peaked, that make it difficult to ladder and get off the rooftop as well, can be considered to be obstructions. Also, slope parapets are not considered to be part of the permanent access landing area. The slope section, as you can see in the diagram, the slope section of the parapet is not considered to be part of your 6 foot deep calculation. Only at the termination of the slope, the red line back, is your permanent access landing area. So from the red line back into that whole green area would be your permanent access landing area. Decorative cornices are also not considered to be part of the usable permanent access landing area because decorative cornices may not be adequately supported for the firefighter to step on. The firefighters generally do their best to avoid putting any weight on these. They'll try to step beyond them so that therefore the perimeter access landing itself needs to be beyond that cornice. Like I was saying, there are some obstructions to perimeter access landing areas, including the decorative parapets and high parapets, but there are things that also, structures that are fixed to the exterior of the building wall can also be considered to cause obstructions, not just things at roof level. These include sun control devices, awnings, solar panels, fire escapes. Now, people go, well, fire escapes, we need them. How can there be obstructions to access? While fire escapes are incredibly important and necessary on buildings, they can cause obstructions to the laddering operations because, one, firefighters don't want to get their ladders necessarily too close to these structures because they don't want to necessarily hit them or damage them because people want to be safely evacuating on them. They also want to get too close to them because people in a fire can panic and reach out for help. And if the firefighter is near it or the ladder is too close to the fire escape, they may reach out for the ladder or the firefighter, which would put themselves and the firefighter in great danger. So generally, the firefighters do their best to ladder away from the fire escapes when possible, which is why we sometimes consider them to be obstruction. Obviously, any awnings and fire and signage, like you can see in the bottom left picture, was obviously an obstruction, but also things like on the side of the rooftop, like these solar panels below the roof line. Now, the rooftop itself looks completely clear, great. There's access everywhere, but the problem is the ladder doesn't just come straight onto the rooftop. It angles up. And if the ladder crushes those solar panels, the ladder is metal, those solar panels may be charged. Now you have an electrified ladder, and on a burning building, firefighter climbing up may get injured. It's not a good situation. So these sort of things are still also considered to be obstruction, even though they're not at roof level. Scaffolding can also be considered obstruction, so it has to be either designed to provide adequate access perimeter access or must be modified to provide if it's existing. And I know a lot of times another question we get a lot is, well, what about signage? What do you need for signage from us? Signage will only be determined for rooftop access during a plan examination by the fire department. While we appreciate that you guys want to put signs up and make it easy for firefighters to get around, too much information can cause overload and make it difficult for the firefighters to find the critical points on the rooftop they need to access and the critical information they need. So during your plan review process, we will tell you what signs are needed, where they're needed, how they're needed, and how they should be designed. So now, great, you have your perimeter access landing areas, you're on the rooftop, but that's only useful if you can get around the rooftop. So you need clear paths and clearances. So clear paths must be 6 feet wide, 9 feet tall, traverse from front to rear and side to side of the building, and there must be a distinct clear path for every 100 linear feet. Clear paths must connect to all the access landing areas. Obviously, you need a clear path that connects to everywhere you could be potentially landing to. They must connect to all fire escapes, bulkhead doors, scuttles, skylights, and this is because obviously those clearance areas are critical and you need to be able to get to them. They also need to, the clearance around the skylight scuttle hatches must be 3 feet on 3 sides. And you can have, like I said before, fences that cross the clear path, but you must provide gates, and they can be secured with bolts and chains that can be cut by standard bolt cutter. The clearance around the rooftop doors must be 6 feet clear radius from the hinge of the door. So you take it from the hinge, 180 degrees, that's 6 feet, that is your clearance around the door. Fire escapes and roof ladders need 3 feet on either side of the ladder or on the other side of the landing opening. So now we've gotten some questions for code interpretations regarding skylights, some existing features, and when they infringe upon the other clearances of like 2 skylights right next to each other, is that considered to be non-compliant? So we clarified the code. So for rooftops construction pursuant to the plans approved by DOB or the FDNY before December 31st, 2017, skulls and skylights that do not have 3 feet of clearance on 3 sides will be considered to be in compliance with FC 504 when clearance is limited by any parapet wall or other qualifying encroachment, such as attic ventilator, chimney, plumbing ventilation, freestanding HVAC condensers with a capacity of 5 tons or more, bulkheads, hatches, scuttles, or other skylights. This does not necessarily mean the rooftop itself is in full compliance with the requirements of the code. It just means that the skylights, the lack of clearance around the skylight caused by one of these qualifying encroachments of the parapet does not cause a non-compliance. This is just the full text of the code, the clarification, so you can read. I know that CUNY will be giving a presentation or posting a presentation, so you can read through it and reference it later. So what happens when you have multiple rooftop levels? You still need to get around using a clear path. So ladders or other approved means must be provided for elevation differences that are 16 feet or less. People ask why 16 feet? Well, because after 16 feet, you'll need a cage around the ladder per OSHA. And cage ladders do not work for firefighters. They have a lot of equipment on their backs. They have hooks they use to open things. They have their tanks on their backs. They'll get tangled in the ladder. Then you have a guy fiddling around on the ladder trying to get himself out. That doesn't work for us. So we need ladders, and we need them to be left with no cages. The other time you don't need ladders is for any setbacks or elevation differences that are less than 6 feet. We may not require ladders. Irregular shaped buildings, such as H-types, will need additional clear paths more than the ones we already discussed, front to rear, side to side. They'll need additional front to rear, side to side on each of the wings. So the northeast wing, front to rear, side to side, southeast, front to rear, side to side, southeast, same thing, southwest, same thing. They all need it. All those clear paths must connect to each other and go across the throat of the building. The throat of the building itself also needs a clear path from front to rear, side to side. Now, like we were talking about elevation differences before, when there's an elevation difference, along the clear path, you need to provide clear path protection, which is a 42-inch high barrier, either railing or parapet of some kind. And that should be provided along any open shafts in the building, unprotected elevation differences. Again, the exception to this is when it's 6 feet or less, you aren't required to provide these barriers. We also want to make sure that you maintain your roof properly. While these things may not directly impede the firefighters' work, they can put firefighters and residents in danger. Improper drainage can lead to damage and weaken the structure beneath, because obviously water can build up, it can cause damage, the weight of it can cause damage, snow can build up. We need proper drainage. So rubbish or your ballast mounts, blocking drains need to be dealt with properly. Obviously, all your conduits and everything need to be properly labeled on the rooftop. Any conduits, piping, closely put together that they can create obstruction. If they're closely put together and they create obstruction greater than 12 inches in height or greater than 24 inches in width, are considered to cause an obstruction to the clear path that they exist in, and they will need to have a non-combustible crossover provided to provide a clear path over them. Rooftop gardens. I know New York is moving toward, very green roofs. So these are going to become more of a thing along next to solar installations. And green roofs and foliage can be considered obstruction for the clear path. All the other rooftop required clearances and permit access. Any vegetation that exceeds 12 inches in height is considered to be an obstruction. And we do require hose connections to be supplied with water supply for any foliage or planters that exceed 250 square feet. Now, this hose connection really is not at all for firefighting operations. It's just to ensure the proper maintenance of the greenery on the rooftop, because a fire in a building is bad, but add to it a dried out dead rooftop garden, and now you have a whole rooftop on fire because the garden's on fire. So these pictures here, just to go over them. The top right picture shows along the perimeter, there's foliage and bushes that are very high, and they would block the ability for someone to ladder to them. I mean, you could say, oh, well, the ladder could crush them. Yeah, but the firefighter has to jump down into it. And how many people would like to jump off, down from 3-4 feet in the air into a bush? Most of you don't want to do that. It's not safe. And again, we want the firefighters to get on safely and off safely so they can quickly and efficiently perform their duties. Also, one of them looks like it's died a little bit. And again, that's not good. Embers strike that catches flame. Now, not only is your rooftop blocked, your perimeter blocked by foliage, it's blocked by flaming foliage, which is even worse. And the lower one shows a rooftop completely covered in greenery that's greater than 12 inches in height, and that completely obstructs your clear path. So the final part of FC 504.4 is simply a lead into FC 512, which is rooftop solar installations shall be designed, installed, and operated in accordance with FC 512. So section FC 512, solar rooftop installations. All solar panels on flat rooftops, which means rooftops that are 20 degrees or less, are required to comply with all the requirements FC 504.4. There are some exceptions to this, one being if you provide a hinged mechanism that would create a clear path and that would move the solar panels out of the way, that would automatically create the clear path. That means it has to be done in one motion to date, and that's done through, you would get that approved through the certificate of approval, TM2 app. To date, there have been none approved, and I do not believe there have even been any filed. It's a very difficult thing. It's honestly much easier for you just to provide the physical clear paths. And there is another allowance for acceptable encroachments on clear path for narrow buildings that are 25 feet or less. So I'm going to go over that clarification here. So this guideline, this exemption allows for qualifying encroachments to encroach upon the clear path to limit the extent of the following. The building rooftop must be 25 feet or less in width and or depth. The design of the solar panel installation must necessitate the substantial rooftop coverage with the solar panels. The encroachment may not reduce the clear path by more than 2 feet or reduce the clear path to less than 4 feet wide. So clear path must always be at least 4 feet wide. If it's 3 feet and 11 inches, then it's no longer considered to be acceptable. It doesn't meet the guidelines for this qualifying encroachment. Qualifying encroachments may not limit permanent access landing areas or any other of the required rooftop clearances. That means they can't be in your permanent access landing. They can't be in your fire escape perimeter clearance areas. They can't be in your rooftop door clearance permit areas, only for clear path encroachments. Proposed installations must be filed with DOB or FDNY for full plan review. No professional certifications for this kind of encroachment are allowed. They must be seen by a plan examiner and approved. Installations must comply with all the requirements of the fire code, including the rest of SC 504.4. So again, the qualifying encroachments are attic ventilators, chimneys, plumbing, ventilation, HVAC, that's over 5 tons, bulkhead hatches, skylights, scuttles, hatches. Solar panels themselves are not considered to be a qualifying encroachment. If your solar panel installation reduces the clear path less than 6 feet, it is non-compliant and needs either a variance or to be updated or redesigned to provide the 6 feet required. So the diagram to the right shows what a compliant rooftop would be like in following these guidelines and FC 504.4. Notice the rooftop is less than 25 feet wide. It's 24 feet wide. The skylights reduce the clear path to 4 feet, which is fine because it's not less than 4 feet. The clear path is still 4 feet or greater. That's okay. And the solar panels themselves do not encroach on the other clearances, and they allow for 6 foot wide clear path beyond them. So everything's good in that situation. This is the full text again if you want to read it later on. Now, what happens when, which is very common, when you're installing solar panels on rooftops that aren't, you know, less than 20 degrees or less in pitch, which is most houses in New York, or a good portion of them at least. That has another set of requirements. You no longer have to comply with FC 504.4, but you need to provide 3 feet of clearance along both sides of the ridge line of the rooftop. So you can see in the diagram, on both sides of the ridge line, you have this red shaded out area, which is the clearance on both sides. This allows for firefighters to cut holes to adequately vent any of the hot gases that may build. You must locate any conduits or anything else along dips and valleys. And you must obviously adequately label and properly label all your conduits and power sources. So there's also another allowance that deals with these pitched rooftops. So 1 to 2 family dwellings whose slope is 9.5 degrees or greater do not have to comply with the requirements of FC 504.4. However, these rooftops instead must comply with FC 512, which means you must provide 3 feet of clearance on both sides of the ridgeline. Again, this is the full text of it, so you can read it. So that's a basic overview of the code itself. Now we're going to go into some non-compliant installations and solutions on how to file. Solutions and how to file. So what requires an application? When do you have to file with my unit, for a variance? So when you have to file is when you're doing work on a rooftop and there is already existing a non-compliance on that rooftop, or your work will cause a non-compliance, and any of these following. You're going to do any of the following: installing new equipment on the rooftop, including cell sites, solar arrays, HVAC. You're going to do vertical enlargements, adding decks, bars, greenhouses, green roofs, blue roofs, new construction building altogether, cantilever buildings. Those also trigger it. So again, if your rooftop has a non-compliance, whether it's existing or proposed, and you're doing any work on it, whether that work is perfectly fine, doesn't cause the non-compliance, even if the work isn't causing non-compliance, you still have to file if the rooftop has an existing non-compliance on it. So here are just some good examples of some non-compliant rooftops we've seen over the years. The one to the left, obviously, that solar array is not acceptable. It completely covers the permanent access, the clear paths. There's no way to move around on that rooftop. It's just not acceptable. You can see this gate. While it looks very simple, and oh yeah, you can get a ladder on top of that. It's a very tall gate. You don't want the firefighters jumping down from that height. So they would have to set that gate back. That fence, sorry, not gate, fence back. They would have to set it back. Now, sometimes we say, oh, you need to put gates in the fences to allow access. We've gotten it where people will file and put a gate right along the facade of the building and say that gives us access. That does not give us access. Firefighters must land onto the rooftop itself before having to work on the gate. We do not want them on the ladder fiddling with locks and stuff, trying to open a gate. So that fence would have to be set back to provide access. Obviously, telecom is a big issue. While it looks like there's some privileged access there, the building only provides one small opening there. And again, you need at least, for every 12 feet, you need at least one distinct opening. That building is more than 24 feet wide. It would need two openings. It only has one, so it needs an additional opening there. You also can't obstruct gates, fire escapes with chains, and you can't alter fire escapes. We do not want to see equipment platforms or fire escapes cut and welded. That's a big issue. We don't want to see things obstructing them like chains. That's a big issue. We don't want people fiddling with things or fire escapes breaking while people are trying to evacuate a burning building. The lower two pictures show very low or flush mounted solar arrays. And people go, well, we've heard many times, well, these are low, they don't cause an obstruction, they're rated for people to walk on them, it's perfectly safe to walk on them. That does not matter for us, honestly. The truth of the matter is, firefighters do not know whether or not your panels are specifically rated for the exact amount of weight that they are carrying on them. First of all, the firefighter themselves is heavier than the standard person will be because they are carrying a lot of heavy equipment on them. And there's also concerns whether the panel's damaged. Is the heat damaging them below them? They don't know what the safety of your panels are. They don't have time to look at signs and verify it. They have a job to do while they're up there. So the assumption is never step on panels, never step on glass. They will not step on them. And therefore we consider them to be obstructions to the clear path. So in these two pictures, while it looks very clean and open, these two arrays obstruct the clear paths and obstruct the clearances of the things they are surrounding. Finally, things don't have to be permanently fixed to the rooftop to be considered obstructions to them. I went on a site visit, I'd say 2 years ago, and found this picture, took this picture of, basically we were garbage full bags of plastic bottles at a recycling facility. They stacked them extremely high. I would say it's a little hard to get perspective here, but that rooftop, that wall to the left was a good 9 or 10 feet high. So that's how high these bags were stacked. And they completely obstructed the perimeter access. They completely obstructed any kind of clear paths. And they're also a fire hazard. We don't want to see that kind of thing either. Finally, there are some extremely interesting designs out there. This is what we call the stair to nowhere. This is something we actually did find on a rooftop. You know, please use good sense when you design your installations. We don't want to see, just because, yeah, there's technically a clear path from front to rear, side to side. Yeah, it doesn't obstruct everything. We don't want stairs going off the side of the rooftop either. You know, just because it seems to match the lunar code doesn't necessarily mean it's safe or good. Make sure some common sense is also injected into what your designs are, because we don't want people walking off the sides of rooftops because there were stairs there. So what does not require an application? This is also very important to know. Rooftops, if you're doing work on rooftops that are over 100 feet in height, you don't need to file with us. Over 100 feet in height, it doesn't trigger the requirement for the code. And if you're doing any ordinary repair, maintenance on a roof, which includes, but it's not limited to, re-roofing, rooftop repair, repairing the parapet, facade repair, and like-for-like replacement of equipment, that is not an upgrade of that equipment. Meaning, if you are replacing one solar panel, it has to be the exact same model number, down to the letter. It can't be the slightly upgraded version B that has exact same design, shape, look, but has slightly modified internals. Doesn't matter if it fits into the exact same spot. Doesn't matter if it has the same look. It's still an upgrade. So therefore, it triggers the code. The like-for-like replacement must be an exact same part for part, same part replacements. Now, the next important thing is, now you have all this information, you need to file with us. You know you need to file with us. So how do you file? Our way to file has changed in the last year due to COVID, and we were also working on an online system. I know this has been a big ask from you guys for many years. Almost every year I've been doing this presentation, we've gotten the question, when are you guys having an online portal? When can we get an online portal? We do have an online portal now. It actually is the only way you can file with us now. I have the website linked up here. You can absolutely go use this. You know, you'll get this page later. You'll be able to access the website. When you go on, be sure to check the user guide to figure out how to navigate the site. You're going to have to create an account. Once you create an account, you're good to go. You'll have to now get to a rooftop access variance application. So you're going to do that, you're going to follow this path, select design and installation. Then you're going to select technology management application, and finally rooftop variances. Do not select fire code variances. We've had that issue before. Fire code variances do not get routed to the rooftop access unit, and it's a different fee, it's a different application type, and we may not be able to refund or transfer the fee that you paid. So be very careful, ensure that you file the correct application type. So what is our application fee? It's $420 for the initial application. Resubmissions do not have an additional fee as long as you resubmit within 6 months of the issuance date on the letter of deficiency. So the documents you'll require is a TM5 application. You're still required to fill out the old TM5 application and have it signed with original signatures from both the owner of the building and the PE or RA. We need 11 by 17 plans with original signed seal and signature. A narrative explaining the scope of work, photographs of the current rooftop conditions, and all other relevant docs, such as determinations from other city agencies, FDMR summons, etc. All documents must be submitted to the rooftop access unit in PDF format. Other formats will not be accepted. We will issue an automatic deficiency saying to correct those and provide them in PDF format. And that will delay the review of your application. Just a quick example of the TM5 application is you still have to submit this, but you have to submit in PDF format, and you must, again, provide the signatures required in original signatures. Digital signatures currently are not accepted. Just what sample plan of what a rooftop plan should look like and what we will be looking for. 11 by 17 plans obviously include the entire rooftop, not only the place you're doing work. We need to see the entire rooftop. We review rooftops holistically because firefighters don't just fight fires in one little spot. They are dealing with the fire. It can spread anywhere on the rooftop. We need to determine the clearances and the safety of the rooftop as a whole. Label all existing building features. Label all the proposed work. Label it as proposed. Label all the existing work or existing features. Label anything that is in non-compliance. Tell us where the non-compliances are. Make it easy for us to find them so we have a quicker turnaround time on your plans. To show us how you will fix those non-compliances. Clearly call out your mitigations. If you have lots of cable trays that are causing an obstruction, say, okay, great. This you pointed out on there. And then you're going to also we're putting a step over and draw the step over and show us how you're going to get over that. Remember, again, all these plans, on every plan sheet that you submit to us, must have the PE signature or PERA signature and stamp on them. Again, this is just a picture of a sample of the pitched roof. You want to show the clearances on the ridge lines along the pitched roof and on every pitched roof. Each elevation of pitched roof technically needs to have 3 feet clearance on each ridge line. These are some additional resources that you guys can utilize if you need more information other than just this presentation. You can obviously go directly to the main source, which is the fire code SC 504.4 and SC 512. You can also go to our New York City Fire Code Guide, which was formerly known as our FAQs. And that's where people have posed questions to the FDNY in the past. We found them very relevant to multiple people. And then we post those questions and the answers to them for everyone to read. You can also read our Office of Technology Management Bulletin. Now, this bulletin is a little out of date now because it has the old way of filing. It needs to be revised. But the other core information about the code itself and what's required and what we're looking for is still the same, still carries over. The only difference now is we just have an online way to file. And finally, the unit contact information. Some of you may have the old rooftop access hotline number. Due to COVID, we don't really have access to that hotline number. You won't really get through to us that way. The best way to get through to us is to email us, and to get through to anyone else at the fire department, is to email us at FDNY Business Support. That'll create a ticket that you can actually track, and the question will be routed to the proper units. And then, that can be tracked. You can follow up on it, and we will get the information back to you as soon as possible. There's some more information about our chiefs, ourselves, and our unit itself. But thank you for listening, and now I will turn it over to my colleague, Yash.
Can you guys hear me?
It could be just a tad louder, please.
Is this better?
A tad more if you can, thank you.
Let me see. What about now?
Oh, perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, nice and blue.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yash Patel. I'm part of the Sustainability Unit at Tech Management and one of the engineers tasked with reviewing ESS applications. I just want to thank CUNY for giving me this opportunity to present our requirements and review process for battery energy storage system. Together with CUNY, we've been working on a permitting process guideline for outdoor battery energy storage systems, which incorporate lithium-ion battery chemistry, which I've hyperlinked to the slide for later reference. From the guideline, you will see the necessary requirements and processes for filing applications for outdoor battery ESS. Even though the guidelines are intended for lithium-ion technology, ESS installations with other chemistries will follow a similar procedure and incorporate many of the requirements set forth by our Outdoor Stationary Storage Battery System Rule 3 RCNY 608-01, which is also hyperlinked to the slide for future reference. Also, when creating the submission package for the project, please note that Tech Management has stopped accepting paper submissions and that all submissions need to be done digitally through the FDNY business portal. When designing these ESS systems and choosing the location for the installation of the ESS, there are many things that need to be considered. The physical size and the charge density of the ESS and what hazards it might pose. Is the ESS nearby buildings, windows, HVAC intakes, gas stations, schools? The gases that can be generated in the event the ESS fails and goes into thermal runaway, the toxicity and the deflagration risk those gases might pose. What safety systems are in place to prevent battery failure and what systems are in place to control and fight the fire due to battery failure? Are there sufficient hydrants in the area where the ESS is being installed? Will those hydrants be able to provide enough water? Where will the FDNY connect to or activate safety systems in the event of failure? Who will be the subject matter expert for the system and the certificate of fitness holder? What procedures need to be followed in the event of failure? Is there any risk of physical damage to the ESS by motor vehicles? And how to safely dispose of the ESS after its life cycle? There are only two types of installations permitted by FDNY, outdoor and indoor. Outdoor systems can either be VRLA, flow batteries, lithium-based batteries, nickel-based batteries. However, for indoor installations, only valve-regulated lead-acid batteries, VRLA, and lead-acid chemistry-based batteries are allowed. To install a prepackaged energy storage system or a completely new system, the equipment manufacturer of the system would need to apply for a certificate of approval. For the manufacturer to receive the certificate of approval, they would need to file a TM2 application, which costs $625, provide cut sheets of the system, installation manual, and any technical documentation, UL listing to 9540, 1973, and 1741, the UL 9548 testing results, and analysis of those results from a third party that is familiar with energy storage systems and the hazards associated with energy storage systems. Once approved and granted a certificate of approval, battery installers may use those systems defined in the certificate of approval for small systems as defined in 3 RCNY 608-01. Once granted a certificate of approval for those size systems, a battery installer could install those systems across NYC if the conditions outlined in the certificate of approval are met. For medium and large systems, the equipment needs to have gone through the certificate of approval process and a TM1 needs to be filed, since medium and large systems are approved on a site-by-site basis. When submitting a TM1 application for energy storage systems, you will need to provide a $420 application fee, $525 complex tech analysis fee totaling $945, site plans created by a design professional that show the location of the ESS and any other relevant information, narrative describing the scope of the work, cut sheet of the system components, installation manual and technical documentation, UL listings, and any other information that might be relevant. And also note that TM1 applications can be submitted in parallel with the DOB to minimize time to get the system approved and up and running. Once the application is received by FDNY, it will be reviewed and a virtual meeting will be set up to discuss the site, since site visits are suspended due to COVID. For the meeting, it would be beneficial to have pictures from multiple angles of the site so we could discuss it during the meeting and go through if we have any concerns. Once that is done, FDNY will review, and if all conditions set forth by 3 RCNY 608-01 are met, then FDNY will issue a letter of acceptance. When submitting a TM1 application, it is crucial to provide certain information for the review process to be as efficient as possible. Based on the battery chemistry and charge density of the ESS, information that needs to be provided will vary. For installations on rooftop or inside buildings, we need to know the construction of the building, where the ESS is located, how will FDNY have access to the ESS, description of the ventilation system, if there's any HVAC intakes in the vicinity of the ESS location, the water-based suppression system, if required, standpipe outlet locations near the installation, emergency exit locations, and if there's any fire hydrants in the area. For information related to the ESS itself, we want to see the system size, applicable product standards that are met, number of batteries in the system, battery chemistry of those cells, the voltage of those cells, UL listings, if there's any cascading protection, the number and types of racks in the enclosure, ventilation system if required, suffragation venting if required. For information related to the inverter, we want to see the size, type, and the listing for the inverter, what the inverter monitors, any protection measures that are built into the inverter. As part of our rule, we require all ESS systems to have battery management systems. Since not all battery management systems are equivalent, we require a description of the BMS, what it monitors, who will be monitoring the output of the BMS, how the BMS can detect that a failure has occurred, the steps that are taken if failure is detected by the BMS, and also provide any information on any other safety measures that are included, like gas sensors, hydrogen sensors, thermal sensors, ground fault protection, arc fault protection. Despite the battery chemistry and size, we require all ESS installations to have a process to completely shut down the system known as an e-stop. E-stop will shut down the system in the event of failure without affecting any of the safety systems incorporated in the ESS. For the e-stop, we want to know the location of the e-stop, who will have access to the e-stop, what is being done to prevent unauthorized access to the e-stop. We also require all applications to have a commissioning, decommissioning, and emergency management plan. For guidance on what to include in the commissioning and decommissioning plan, NFPA 855 is a good resource to look at. For the emergency management plan, we want to see what actions are taken in the event of failure, the responsibilities of the subject matter experts, and the certificate of fitness holder if an event occurs. Also, the plan of action for firefighters. Depending on the battery chemistry and the size of the system, multiple TM applications would need to be filed along with the site-specific approval TM1, which is, and in this slide, for your reference, I've detailed all the steps that need to be taken in filing those applications. And this is our contact information. And once again, I want to thank CUNY for this opportunity.
Thank you very much to the Fire Department of New York. If you'll stay with me, John and Yash, come back on camera if you can. We've got about 12 minutes for some questions, and we do have a list of questions here. So we'll go back and forth from solar questions to storage questions. Thank you once again for joining us and for working with our team day in and day out on solar and storage. Really appreciate it and celebrate with everybody else the online services. So let's talk about rooftop access. And there's several questions about railings. So John, I'm assuming this might be to you. Question regarding the guardrails. If the building does not have a parapet and they need to install a guardrail, can a continuous guardrail, 42 inches in height, be installed at the roof edge and have the 6-foot perimeter pathway inside of the guardrail? Was that for you, gentlemen?
I understand the question and where it's going. Yeah, so any securely affixed to the rooftop barrier, railing that is of substantial construction can be essentially a substitute for the parapet and be placed along the facade of the building. So it'd be treated just like though it was a parapet, and then you can have the 6-foot landing beyond it. It can't be set back. Once it's set back, then it becomes an issue of how the firefighters access the rooftop, and that becomes an obstruction to the perimeter access landing. So it can and should be set along the facade, or if you can't set along the facade of the building, set it back 6 feet so they can land and then access it.
Okay, thank you, John. I'll go over to a storage question now. So Yash, is a TM1 required for every installation or just those battery systems not yet approved by FDNY?
So this is Nick speaking, and I could take this one for Yash. So I think that's so the TM1 site-specific application is needed for our, as we said, as Yash had mentioned, for the medium and the large systems. Site-specific application is not required for small systems, which are 20 kilowatt hours and under. And more specifically, a TM1 site-specific application for large systems is the sort of the review of the site conditions and all those requirements as per the New York City rule. So for medium and large, TM1 is required. For small, no TM1 required. Just the TM2, which is the certificate of approval.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Nick, for joining us. Nice to see you as always. Back to a question about railings. New construction buildings have continuous parapets 42 inches in height to comply with FC 504.4.5. However, when bringing an existing site into compliance, the installers need to install a barrier or railing. This barrier or railing cannot obstruct the access landings or require a 3-foot gate as per that FC 504.4.3. So the question is, can you explain why the FDNY differentiates between parapets and barrier railings in this manner?
Well, again, we don't really differentiate in that sense because, as I said, the parapet, when I spoke earlier in the presentation, isn't part of the perimeter access landing area. You can only use calculations. So it's never allowed to be in that perimeter access landing area either. Railings also can't be there, and we do allow them to be along the facade and take the place of parapets or be set back 6 feet and not be in the perimeter access landing area. So it's not really differentiation, it's just parapets are usually almost always along the facade, so that's why it doesn't come into play the same way railings usually do.
Okay, thank you. Back over to storage question. Would the FDNY accept an application for review for a battery product that is currently under UL 9540A certification process if the battery installation will not happen until after the UL 9540A certification is received and processed by the FDNY? So I guess, can they be in parallel?
Yeah, and I think I will do allow parallel review as long as proof is submitted from that specific battery manufacturer that they did submit their certificate of approval application. There is a lot of other information that can be reviewed until the product has conducted that 9548 testing and the analysis shows if there's any sort of mitigation measures that are needed or anything like that. We've historically kind of done that with some other projects as well. Site-specific review can be conducted if a good majority of the certificate of approval process has gone through. We can issue conditional requirements on those letters of acceptance that the product does obtain the certificate of approval. So baseline, I think, yes, it's allowed in parallel, but we do need verification that that submission was conducted.
Okay, that sounds like might be good news for many people. Can the solar question, can the entire accessible perimeter be considered a landing area if it's unobstructed?
Yes, the short answer is yes. The more access, the better, honestly. That pattern is not a requirement. You don't have to follow that pattern. You don't have to only have 6 feet open every 12 feet. We want the whole thing open if possible. That pattern and that requirement is the minimum, not the maximum. It's just the minimum.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks. Back over to storage. Can lithium-ion batteries for e-bikes be stored indoors in a fire-rated cabinet? Oh, this got off the topic a little bit, but it's on my list here.
That's actually a great question, and there is a lot of discussion going on, especially in the fire department, about e-bikes, and especially because of some of the history and some of the accidents that have happened. A couple of large, pretty involved fires in New York City that were very difficult to control because of e-bikes. So the regulations are not out there. I do believe that regulations are being drafted in New York City to clarify that. So I would recommend keeping an eye out. There could be some clarification sent out to the industry soon about what type of storage and protection is needed for e-bikes.
Okay. Another question, back to John probably. Is there any way to determine in advance whether a truck can reach a side of a building, such as knowing the length of a truck or turning radius?
As of right now, the fire department does not have a specific, for rooftop access, does not have a specific guideline for that. Again, as I said before, if you are unsure, you can either err on the side of caution and say, and provide access along that exposure, or you can reach out to us directly by submitting a question to the Business Support Network Center, and we will respond and say yes or no whether that perimeter needs access.
Okay. A question regarding the listener said that a previous speaker mentioned a code, but they only got a portion of it. 365.01, but there were numbers and letters before that. Is this a New York State building code or an FDNY code? Not sure if that's an easy answer or not. I would just probably say that I believe you guys are posting these, correct, in the videos, so they can always go back and check out that speaker. We will post the entire webinar, but we will also post the presentation separately, so you can go right to a particular presentation you might want to take a deeper dive into. FDNY mentioned that medium systems need installation approval. Table 2 in FC 608 says installation approval is only needed for large systems. Can you please confirm?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. So site-specific installation approval and the sort of the technicality of it is only for large systems, but medium systems do require a permit application. So that TM1 is not really a full-on site review. It's more of an application for that permit, for that operating permit. So what that medium system review ends up being is more along the lines of confirmation with the certificate of approval for that system that all the installation requirements and conditions are met. And that's for sort of a post-installation permit issuance. So, large systems still require that pre-installation TM1 application. The medium requires that TM1 just sort of for the site-specific permit issuance. Now, that's only if that system has obtained that certificate of approval. If we're looking for some sort of parallel review where the system hasn't received it yet, it would still require a site-specific TM1 for review of the site before it gets installed.
Okay, great. And Nicholas, why don't you introduce yourself as you join the team after the presentations, just so that the audience of our installers and developers know who you are and your areas of expertise.
Yes, of course. And thank you for having me. My name is Nick Petrakis. I'm the Assistant Deputy Director of the Sustainability Unit. I have great engineers working for us, Yash as well included, a number of other engineers. So pleasure having me. Pleasure me being here, and let me know if you guys have any questions.
Okay, here's another question. Thank you, Nick. Is the COA assigned at the installation level or at the building block level, aka the cabinet or rack?
That's a good question with the certificate of approval. So I do know that we will, working with CUNY, we will have some in the future a webinar to sort of clarify the certificate of approval requirements and things like that. But just off the top of my head, so it really depends on what the testing for 9540A has been conducted to and how the system architecture is. Some technologies are really built up to what we call a unit level. So it's the cell, the module, the unit might end up being, for an outdoor system, might end up being the entire prepackaged energy storage system. So 9540A testing that has been conducted all the way up to that unit level, if it terminates there and the testing shows that the unit level is the only level of testing that needs to be conducted, that can be the level of, let's say, certificate of approval that needs to be obtained. But, there's situations out there where we have manufacturers that just are, let's say they're just manufacturing a rack level system, and that ends up being integrated into a larger container. So that rack level system, which we would call a unit, can obtain their certificate of approval with certain conditions. Now, when we talk about when manufacturers buy that, it sort of instills confidence in that product. Now a manufacturer can buy that rack level. They would come to us for a certificate of approval with that rack inside their entire energy storage system as a total unit, as an installation. So it might be a little confusing, but hopefully that kind of clarifies.
Thank you, Nick. And as Nick mentioned, in the next, I think, 2 to 3 weeks, there will be a deep dive into the COA process. And if you receive notification of this workshop, you will receive that notification. So we look forward to the details of that. Here's a question about why are solar panels considered more dangerous than HVAC vents, for example, and require 6 feet and not 4 feet? That'd be a John question.
Yeah, no, I mean, the concern is obviously the cells are charged, can be charged, more fragile usually than HVAC. And it's not all HVAC is allowed to be a qualifying encroachment. Again, it was HVAC that are 5 tons or greater that cannot be relocated. The essential thing was these are units that cannot easily be relocated, and that's why it was allowed to be a qualifying encroachment. We don't want installations going up everywhere, encroaching on the clear path. The encroachment is an allowance trying to help the industry be able to install on these very complicated packed rooftops that New York has. It's not the ideal situation. It's actually not something we really want to see, the encroachments, but we understand that it's very difficult, and New York's a very complicated city to install in.
I want to thank the FDNY, John and Nick and Yash for joining us today. There are many more questions. We will be forwarding them to the FDNY team to answer, and again, we'll post them. Thank you again very much for your time and your expertise and for working with us day in and day out. And I'd now like to welcome Barry Stein. He is the Chief Examiner for the New York City Department of Buildings. And Barry, you now have the floor.
Okay, thank you. All right, I was having a little technical difficulties, but Emily helped me through. So you can see my screen fine?
Yep, we can see you and we can hear you just fine, Barry.
That's great. Okay, so good afternoon. My name is Barry Stein. I am the Chief Plan Examiner at the Hub Full Service and Hub Self-Service units. And as always, I'd like to acknowledge the contribution of some of my associates, in this case, Rasha Cobriel and Linda Tam, who helped enormously in the preparation of this presentation. As a team, we have worked together over the last few weeks to create this overview. Let's see. It's, for some reason, it's not advancing. Oh, okay, fine. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you an overview, general requirements, some specifics of what's a solar approval permit, sign-off filing, a little bit about the property tax abatement, zoning requirements, some specialized applications, and of course, contact information. So let's just go back a little bit in time. And back in 2009, that was the first RCNY 10502, and it was enacted in March 12th, 2009. And since then, it's been renewed until 2024. Back in April 30th of 2012, the City Planning Commission added a Zone Green amendment to the New York City zoning resolution. And over the years, they've updated that to include a lot of information about solar panels and especially how to handle them as permitted obstructions above the roof level. At that time, we saw solar systems, they were primarily installed on 1- and 2-family residences. And the property tax abatement applications were required to be filed with the Hub Full Service as D14 self-certification of objections. Also, if you had a non-PTA application, you could file it either with the Hub or the boroughs. Okay, so a little bit about where we are now. So you can see that from when they started to collect the records from 2011 to 2020, we've gone up about 5,000 applications a year. So recently, a few things have changed at the department, and we're moving towards DOB now. So some of the things that I'm going to tell you are going to be how to file the tax abatements and what goes through what the old BIS system and what goes through DOB now. So all solar jobs, both PTA and non-PTA, are filed as BIS applications through e-filing, and they're reviewed at the Hub Full Service, Hub Self-Service. So solar applications are not filed through DOB now as of yet. At some later date, they will be, but right now they're still being filed as BIS applications. Non-tax abatement applications as of 6/01/2020 are no longer reviewed in the boroughs. So that means that any solar application that you file, whether it's a tax abatement or a non-tax abatement, is going to come to our unit. Okay. Now, tax abatement applications can also be filed through Hub Self-Service. This is when you professionally certify them. So it has to consist of a 1- or 2-family residence, have a sloped roof for the FDNY definition, and does not exceed 10 kilowatts. If you want to file a non-PTA application, you can file it through the Hub Self-Service, and it doesn't have to meet these requirements. Okay. So the property tax abatement is extended till 2024, and it's the lesser of 5% of the eligible solar electrical generating system expenditures, or the amount of taxes payable in such year, or the cap is at $62,500. One thing that's new is local laws 92 and 94, and they were effective 2019. These laws amend the 2014 Administrative Code and Chapter 15 of the New York City Building Code to require, subject to certain exceptions, all new buildings, new roofs resulting from enlargements of existing buildings, and existing buildings replacing an entire existing deck or roof assembly. Now they have to be provided with a sustainable roofing zone. Now 100% of that sustainable roofing zone can either be a solar application or a green roof application or some combination thereof. So you can see that through the Buildings Bulletin 2019 of 010. Also, where we are now is battery backup system filing protocols have been established. So a little bit of a look into the future will be community solar projects. And that would be where all the solar is off on one property, and it will start feeding buildings that are in various other parts of the community. Right now, the tax abatement is married to the tax lot. We are going to have an energy storage tax abatement. And at a future date, the solar applications are going to be filed through DOB now, but not yet. Okay. So an overview of the construction requirements. You're going to need a construction permit. You're going to be required to get an electrical permit. And then after the work is done, you're going to need a construction sign-off. And that's through the Department of Buildings, and an electrical sign-off, which is also through the Department of Buildings. Okay. So projects filing for the property tax abatement. So again, we sort of have two things. Some of them are just for property tax abatement. Some of them are non-property tax abatement. So the property tax abatement is a little bit more stringent in the requirements, but once again, it all gets filed through our unit. So the PTA projects must be e-filed through the Hub full service as a professional certification of objections protocol. And that means that you get a plan review, we send it back to you, you respond to the comments, you certify it on an AI1, and you automatically get an approval. If we find that there's some problems with the project, we do reserve the right to audit it. And for the 1 and the 2 family homes with pitched roofs and a maximum of 10 kilowatts, as I said before, you have the option of filing it professionally certified through the Hub self-service. Okay, so this is very important. The property tax abatement applications must be filed as work type OT solar tax. Applications filed as OT solar will not qualify for a tax abatement. The problem is DOB cannot modify the work type on an application once it has been submitted to the DOB for review. So if you don't specifically say OT solar tax, and then you change your mind and later on you do want to make it a solar tax, we will require you to refile. So projects not filing for the property tax abatement are also filed through e-filing and reviewed at Hub Full Service or Hub Self-Service. Again, the boroughs no longer review non-PTA applications. And it's good for you to familiarize yourselves with Buildings Bulletin 2018-008. And this will tell you when a final inspection by the design professional of record is required. So in this case, for solar projects, you're going to both need a final inspection by your design professional, plus a final inspection by the Department of Buildings. Okay, the licensing requirements. For the drawings, you'll need a registered architect, RA, or professional engineer. You'll have to submit an asbestos form if it's an existing building built prior to April 1st, 1987. And you'll need a special inspector or a special inspection agency for the TR1 special inspections. Sometimes the applicant of record is also a registered special inspector, and they can do both. Okay. So you file your application online and you upload all your documents into e-filing. You pay online, you submit your drawings, and once they're approved, you can obtain the construction permit. And that's a PW2 form, and that's still submitted through e-filing. I'll get into some of the documents that have to go through DOB now. Okay. You'll need the EF1, the cover sheet, PW1, very important, which has all the pertinent information, applicant of record, zoning information, building information, work permit application, a PW2, which does not have to be submitted until the time of the permit. A PW3 cost estimate is required, and the PW3 has to match the costs that you put down on the PTA 4 form. And important to note that it's limited only to the work pertaining to the solar installation. So if you're doing solar panels, you can include parapet work or re-roofing work or structural work. Sometimes people want to remove some skylights, infill them. That all has to be under separate application. Then you have your TR1. Generally, the special inspections include a structural stability and fire-resistant penetration in joints. Then you also have a progress inspection, which is energy code compliance inspections and final. And there might be other special or progress inspections depending on whether or not you're in a special flood hazard zone. Okay. The TR8, that's the energy progress inspections. You're going to require at a minimum air sealing and insulation. Now, it's important to note that progress inspections can be done by the applicant of record. The TR1, the special inspections need to be performed by the special inspector or special inspection agency. So now this is a new item here, is the tenant protection plan. The tenant protection plan is required anytime the building is occupied during construction. So as of November 10th, 2020, and there is a service notice that you can look it up, the TPP is now a required item submitted prior to permit, and it's submitted through DOB now, not e-filing. So previously, it was an item required prior to approval and reviewed by plan examiner. So see the service notice for updated requirements on who is permitted to file the TPP. The the people who are permitted to file the TPP has changed a bit. So it's important to read the service notice. And of course, you have a combination of different asbestos forms. You have the ACP5 form if you're disturbing less than 25 linear feet or 10 square feet of asbestos-containing material. And ACP7 if it's more than that, and then you would need to have it abated prior to permit, and then provide the ACP21. And exemption, buildings constructed per plans approved on or after April 1st, 1987, then you don't need any asbestos filing. Okay. So if you're going to file for tax abatement, you're going to need a preliminary PTA4 form. You also, in some instances, may need an FDNY letter of acceptance. That's when the roof access path, you would need to get some kind of variance from the fire department. And that's required prior to approval. And I apologize, I was not on line when the FDNY was giving their presentation, so they might have talked about this. If you're doing a professionally certified application, you have to do a POC1, and if it's a full service, it's an AOS1. If for some reason you are filing a solar thermal application, you would also need a PW1B. However, in all the time that I've been working at the DOB on solar jobs, I have yet to see one solar thermal application yet. You may be in a landmarks preservation district, and if so, you would need to give us a letter of no effect for existing buildings, or a copy of a certificate of appropriateness if you're putting those panels on new buildings. If the building is in a city-owned property, you're going to have to give us approval from the Public Design Commission. Okay. Different signatures you'll need are the building owner, the PE or the RA, the general contractor, the asbestos investigator, and the notary, which would be required on the PW3. Okay. So there's different items that are required for the drawings to get a construction permit. We want a plot plan, basically the location of the buildings on the site, indicating trees, structures, city services, utilities, site hazards, adjacent buildings. Most importantly, a site plan with a roof plan and elevations showing the solar modules in place, other equipment and structures pertinent to or having impact on code compliance of the system, and very important also that you comply with FDNY section 504.4 and 512 for slope roofs. You want to show the system components. You want to show the location of the main meter, the AC disconnect switch, and the inverter or inverters. Also important, zoning compliance. We want to make sure that your solar installation falls within the permitted zoning envelope, and we'll talk a lot more about zoning in a couple slides. Flood hazard compliance, if applicable. If you're in a special flood hazard district, you're going to have to give us a P-firm, substantial improvement calculations, and you're going to have to show the base flood elevation, the design flood elevation, and other flood lines on the elevations. You'll also have to give us an energy analysis, and what's good is we actually have a template for that we can shoot over to you, so you don't have to start from scratch. We want to see the anchorage and racking systems. We're going to need some structural wind analysis statement on the drawings that the roof can support the loads, the fire department access, And one thing to note is at the time of the submission of the construction documents, no electrical drawings are required for plan approval, except there is one exception. If you're going to have to do a separate filing if the electrical plan examination for the solar equipment is above 600 volts, the solar system is 1,000 kVA or above, or it is connected to the first or second level OCPD. I think that's overcurrent something device of an existing 1,000 kVA service. We get very few of those. Now, if you do have one of those projects, you're going to have to get a predetermination, a CCD1. See, currently, New York City adopts the 2008 NEC, and that's included in the 2011 New York City Energy Code. Now, a practical difficulty of complying with Article 690 of the 2011 New York CEC for solar systems over 600 volts is that it requires applicants to file a CCD1 in order to use the 2014 NEC for solar inspections, installation and inspections. See, because New York City hasn't adopted the 2014 NEC yet. So for applications that are for proposals 1,000 kVA or above, or for systems connected to a first or second level of an existing 1,000 kVA service, a filing for electrical plan examination is required. And then you file the predetermination through the Hub Full Service determinations at buildings.nyc.gov, and it gets sent over to Technical Affairs. Technical Affairs will review it, and they will draft a response, and then it comes back to us, and our unit actually stamps it. So you'll get Borough Commissioner Elizabeth Skoranik's stamp on it, goes back to Technical Affairs, and then gets sent out to you guys. So these are the items that are required for the electrical. It's sort of two prongs. You have construction, and then you have electrical. Generally, for a job that is under the 600 volts, all you need is an ED16A. You file that electronically through the DOB Now online filing system. You'll need manufacturer's data sheets. A work permit is issued, so no plan review is required except for systems above 600 volts or kVA and above. You will only need a plan at the time of sign off. You will need a 3-line diagram. So that's electrical inspection. When you're ready for sign off, you'll arrange for a DOB electrical inspection, and a 3-line electrical diagram is required at the time of the sign off. Okay. To get the property tax abatement, so this is always like a bit of a rush. The signed off, this is very important, the signed off application must be submitted to the DOB by March 15th in order for the abatement to commence on July 1st of that year. And this includes filing some items through eSubmit and some items through the DOB Now. You submit the PW2 through e-filing for the construction permit. If for some reason you're going to require an L2, that gets submitted through DOB Now. Before you get the approval, if you need to submit any PAAs, that would go through the e-filing. Right now, there's a problem with the way that they've revamped the system. So the plan examiner doesn't automatically get notified anymore that there's plans ready for review. So you have to contact the Hub Full Service Project Advocate mailbox and let them know that documents are uploaded, and they will inform the plan examiner. So after the work is complete, you request a construction inspection through DOB Now. and you also request the electrical inspection through DOB now. You also need the Con Edison utility connection letter. You then also need to upload the PW7, which is the sign-off, the letter of completion form, the final PTA4, a final PW3, an EN2, a final TR1 and TR8, and a TR7. And what we want is, we want all of these documents uploaded at the same time. Then you email Green Roofs and Solars at buildings.nyc.gov to request sign off. The DOB will review the documents and signs off the job. Then the DOB submits all this information over to the DOF, and the Department of Finance sends a letter to the owner, eligible expenditures and percentage of property tax deduction, start and end dates of tax abatement. They're good for 4 years. Okay, let's get into the zoning a little bit. So as I said, on the 2012, they came out with this zone green amendment. And one of the good things is it started to address the fact that people were putting solar panels on buildings and what kinds of allowances they were going to give. So on walls existing on April 30th, if you project not more than 10 inches and not more than 20% of the surface area of the building wall, you can have that as a right. And the roof coverage does not count as an additional story. Okay. So if you have a building that has a pitched roof and it's at the maximum allowable zoning height, they allow you to go 18 inches above that as a permitted obstruction. And that's measured perpendicular to the roof surface. And a sloped roof is defined as a roof that has a slope greater than 20 degrees. Okay. We have a lot of buildings that are flat roofs, and they're in the lower density zoning districts, which are R1 and R5 through R5. And these are also buildings that are ripe for the installation of canopies. So solar installations are allowed on flat roofs without square foot limitations up to a height of 4 feet, measured from the maximum building height or the height of the building, whichever is greater. That's very important. So the thing is if you have a building that is already overbuilt, the zoning resolution says, we don't care. We're still going to allow you to go up the 4 feet. And in the districts where the zoning envelope is determined by a sloping plane, which is in these lower zoning districts, the height is measured vertically instead of perpendicular to the sloping envelope. This is measured from the maximum permitted perimeter wall height. And I'm going to show you some slides on that. So if we take this square, this rectangle, and this is the maximum permitted wall height, which is usually somewhere between 21 and 25 feet, you're usually allowed to go up to the maximum building height of 35 feet. The zoning resolution then allows you another 4 feet as a permitted obstruction. So what you do is you basically take that red dashed triangle and you just lift it up 4 feet. And there you can see, you can easily put a canopy in there. And the canopy should be 9 feet clear so that the fire department can have their required access. And in this particular case, the canopy structure can be included in the cost of the solar panels. In these districts, they also allow you to go a little higher than 4 feet. You can go 6 feet, but there are certain limitations. Okay. The limitation of panels that are 6 feet is that they're limited to 25% of the roof area. And they have to be set back 6 feet from the street line. So you'll see that on the left. The street wall, rather. Okay. Solar installations higher than 4 feet in residential districts. The zoning resolution allows solar panels as a permitted obstruction 4 feet above roof level as measured from the maximum permitted building height per the zoning resolution, or the existing height of the building, whichever is greater. So if the zoning resolution says you can only go up to 100 feet, but you have an existing building that is 110 feet, you can start with the 110 feet. So solar installations may be installed higher than the 4 feet on residential buildings per the following. In R1 through R5 districts to a height of 6 feet, which we saw in the other slide, and in R6 to R10 districts to a height of 15 feet. But the issue is, if you want to go above the 4 feet, you have to set back 6 feet from the street wall, and you're limited to 25% of the roof area, and it's calculated based upon the roof on which the solar panels are installed, not the entire roof of the building. Okay. Similarly, if we have a commercial district and you want to go, again, 4 feet always, you can go 4 feet above the height of the building without any issues. If you want to go above the 4 feet, you have two options. In commercial districts mapped within R1 through R5 districts, and in C3 and C4-1, you can go up to 6 feet. And in all other commercial districts and commercial districts mapped within R6 to R10 districts, you can go up to a height of 15 feet. And again, you're subject to the same limitations that we described in the previous slide. 6 feet back from the street wall and 25% of the roof. And on any bulkhead, you can go up 6 feet. And similarly, if you're in a manufacturing district, you can go above the 4 feet, you can go up to 6 feet. And again, you're subject to the same setbacks and roof coverages as per the residential and the commercial districts. Sometimes you might get a building that's non-complying or non-conforming, okay? And solar installation buildings with non-conforming uses. Non-conforming means like it's a residential building in a manufacturing district. So the thing is, you couldn't build that building today. They allow you what they call incidental alterations to non-conforming buildings. And we've reviewed this with the Department of City Planning, and they are saying that they will consider a solar installation and or solar canopy as an incidental alteration on a non-conforming building. And you just have to measure it from the existing height of the building rather than the maximum height of the applicable district. So this is really good. Okay, As I said, we recently came out with Local Law 92 and 94, which is requiring now that a certain percentage of the roof be dedicated to sustainable use. And you have the choice of making it solar or a green roof or a combination thereof. I would refer you to Buildings Bulletin 2019-10. And this applies to projects with construction documents approved on or after November 15th. So we're going to start to see a lot more of these projects coming in because now it's a requirement on all of these new buildings. And one thing that we discussed a lot when they were enacting Local Law 92 and 94, since it was a mandate, whether or not you could still apply for a tax abatement. And everyone agreed that yes, you could still apply for a tax abatement. Okay. Say you're in a flood zone, what you're going to have to give us is a FIRM, which is the flood elevation maps from 2007, a PFIRM, which is the flood elevation map that was from 2013, and you're going to have to design to the more stringent of the two. In 97% of the cases, the PFIRM is more stringent. There's a couple of locations where the FIRM is more stringent. So in that case, you're going to have to give substantial improvement calculations to show that you're not over 50% of the building value, and you'll be required to do a flood zone compliance inspection on the TR1. The issue with the buildings in the flood zone is that we have to be able to figure out where your building is in relationship to the base flood elevation and the design flood elevation. So you have three options to prove this. You can give us a site survey or elevation certificate stamped by the New York State licensed surveyor within the last year, or a site survey or elevation certificate older than 1 year, but then you just need to have a professional statement on the AI1 saying the site survey is consistent with the current site conditions. That means that whatever site survey you supply and the present conditions haven't changed. Then there's yet a third option where all the equipment is on the roof, the panels and microinverters are all up on the roof, where all the equipment other than the AC disconnect switch is located on the roof. The applicant shall include a utility certification on the plans. So you just have to put this certification on and you don't have to give us a site survey. A few things to note is that Con Ed has its own jurisdiction and it can put its utility meter at any location. But any new meter that you put on from the utility company, from the utility company and any other equipment must be located. Any new meter shouldn't say utility company. It should be from the solar company. Has to be located above the design flood elevation. The one thing that does not have to be located above the design flood elevation is the AC disconnect switch. And that has to be located 2 meters above the ground floor or a working platform. We're seeing a lot more applications that are ballasted. And if you're doing a property tax abatement application, You cannot put a ballasted system on roofs that are higher than 100 feet. And the ballasts have to be self-contained, okay? If you see these, they're like little blocks and they're in shoes. It can't be loose gravel in a shoe. And one of the things that we were asked to talk about are carports, which are becoming very popular, where people are designing carports and they want to put the solar panels on top of the carports. So in this case, you're actually going to need two completely different applications. You're going to need a construction application for the carport structure, and that gets filed as an alteration type 2 in DOB now. And then you would file a separate property tax abatement for the panels. And it's very important to read the zoning, because I just want to alert you that solar panels right now are not a permitted obstruction in any yard. So I think that covers it. I thank you very much. And if you have questions, they should all be directed to green roofs and solars at buildings.nyc.gov. And there's a group of us that will be happy to answer any and all questions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Barry. Coming up next, we have Alan Price. He is the director of the OTCR New York City at the New York City Department of Buildings, and you can continue to put your questions also in the Q&A box, and we'll get to what we can, and the ones that we can't get to, we will still get those answered and post them online. So Alan, you can go ahead and turn your camera and your sound on, and you have the floor. Alan, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, I think that does it. I'll just do a sound check. Can everyone hear me?
Just fine, thank you, Alan.
Excellent, excellent, wonderful. Sorry about that. Okay, my name is Alan Price. I am the director of the Office of Technical Certification and Research within the Department of Buildings. We are a somewhat unique unit in the Department of Buildings in that we have been tasked with approving all alternative materials that are not prescribed in the code, and batteries actually fall into that category, at least energy storage systems. They do not fall into the code, and they are considered an alternative, and that's what leads them to my office for review. I wanted to thank the organizers of this event for inviting me to present today. I have presented in the past and provided lots of information over the last couple of presentations that we gave on how to file an application for energy storage systems with OTCR. Instead of repeating that information, I did want to present some new requirements that we did not see the last time. They are actually new to the process. And so that will be the focus of this presentation. But of course, we'll give some reminders here about the existing process just to start out. So on screen here, you see an image of Buildings Bulletin 2019-002. This bulletin is the starting place for anyone that would be filing with OTCR. and also anyone who would be filing with the Department of Buildings when they are looking to file for an energy storage system. This bulletin does not cover technical requirements. So unfortunately, we have not published any technical requirements yet. Those technical requirements may be similar to the rule. I'm sure FDNY went over their rule earlier today with you. It may be similar to some of the requirements that you would see in the FDNY rule. We are working on that rule, and we're actively pursuing publishing a rule, but for now, we do not have a rule or any technical requirements. We have submittal documents that we request through this bulletin. So if I could have you turn to the next screen, please. Just as a reminder, Buildings Bulletin looks at two things. I just covered the filing, approval, permitting, and sign-off requirements that would be necessary for any type of construction project, whether it be new construction, alterations, adding equipment. This would always, this is always the process. This is the typical process that you would follow for filing with the Department of Buildings. Of course, with energy storage systems, we have a process, again, for filing, approval, permitting, and sign-off. It is very similar to other procedures that you have used to file any projects. However, we do have a couple of requirements that we have just to make sure that the projects are filed so that we can identify them as energy storage systems. So if you turn to the bulletin in your spare time, you will be able to file, you will be able to see those requirements. However, most of the bulletin, and this is certainly what I would like to cover today, looks at the submittal requirements for the OTCR evaluation process. So why two procedures? OTCR, as I mentioned before, looks at alternative materials. Alternative materials through the code, as required by the administrative code, must be approved before they can be used. And so this is why we have an additional process, the OTCR evaluation process. We need to approve the system before it can be installed. Okay, next screen, please. Okay, so I like graphical information, and certainly in the presentation, providing some type of graphical representation of requirements or of some of the provisions may help everyone remember what these requirements are, and may help you kind of tune into what the requirements are. And so this slide is meant to represent what we saw on the previous slide with a few additional details. What you see here on the arrow is the construction process. Again, this is the process that you will find with any construction process, alteration process, any type of project where you're adding equipment. This is the process to be filed with the Department of Buildings. And you can see at the bottom, we have some of the key milestones superimposed on the process. With OTCR and with our approval process, again, we have a requirement to approve the material and system, the battery system. So at the top of the slide, what is superimposed onto the construction process is the OTCR procedure for filing and getting approved an energy storage system. You will see here in the first box that we have the submittal requirements that are outlined in the bulletin. under the next item, you will see that alternative materials, it's labeled as alternative materials. And you can see that to obtain an OTCR conditional acceptance for the energy storage system, you would have to do that before the permit is issued. So laying this all on top of the construction process hopefully gives you an idea of when things have to be done, and kind of, again, makes it a little easier to digest this requirement for OTCR. What I'd like to focus on, though, is the submittal process, the first box for OTCR. Again, we can find everything in the submittal process under the buildings bulletin. I'm going to move to the next slide and cover just some of the requirements that we have outlined in the submittal process. What starts the process, the OTCR evaluation process, or perhaps maybe I should say what initiates the process, is the submission of an OTCR2 application. Again, this is information that's probably repetitive from my last year's presentation, if you were there. But that application, again, it initiates the process. We cannot move forward with an application with an evaluation without the OTCR2 application. You can find this application on our website. The next step then in the process would be to submit everything that we have outlined in our checklist. The checklist is linked to the bulletin, or is linked from the bulletin, I should say. Sorry about that. And you will find that there are many requirements for the checklist. What I have done here is highlight the major requirements. And these are the requirements where applicants will spend, I would probably dare say, 90% of their time on the application. So again, just for review, the first thing would be to submit plans. Typically, these are preliminary plans that are submitted to us. The plans would cover, of course, site plans for where the battery is located. It would also cover fire protection plans, and also it would detail any deflagration or explosion venting that may be necessary. Those are certainly the plans that we kind of focus on in our review. You, of course, can and would be required to submit other plans as well, including electrical plans, but we do not in OTCR focus on the electrical review. That would be done during the electrical submission for a permit. Moving on, after the plans are submitted, you would have to submit a listing certificate, a listing certification for the battery that will be proposed. So as with any equipment in our code, equipment has to be listed. In the mechanical code, there is a clear provision, very clear provision that says all equipment has to be listed. And if you look at the other codes, you will find similar statements, or you will find similar patterns through the code. For instance, the building code has requirements for certifications on materials. It may not be a listing. It's kind of one step removed from a listing, but there is a requirement for certifications. Same is true for batteries. We are looking for a battery to be listed. The listing for an energy storage system is now covered under UL 9540. UL 9540 actually incorporates the other two standards that are on this slide. That would be UL 1973 for the battery, and also UL 1741 for the inverter. UL 9540 is a system listing. So it takes into account the entire system and evaluates the installation from a system level. Next, we have the large-scale testing requirement. Large-scale testing requirements, I'm pretty sure FD&Y touched on this in their prior presentation, but this is somewhat unique to batteries. You won't find this for a lot of products within the code. However, we do require this testing that would not only give us a sense of how the battery performs, but also the designer, the registered design professional, the manufacturer as well. It gives all of the key stakeholders a sense of how the battery performs under certain conditions. And of course, we are looking at conditions where there could be an overcharge condition that would create a thermal runaway event, or it could create a condition for the buildup of explosive gases. And this test, again, identifies how the batteries will perform under these conditions. So that is a requirement. What is new to the process, though, is the peer review, and that is highlighted in the next couple of slides. I'm going to ask you to move to the next couple of slides. And in the peer review, we are asking for a third party to review the design of the system, primarily looking at the testing requirements, or the testing data, I shouldn't call them requirements, the testing data that will be received by the UL 9540A testing. The peer review is performed by a reviewer who is a New York State PE that has relevant fire protection and energy storage system experience. They should be retained by the owner, not the registered design professional. We do want some independence because the peer reviewer is checking the work of the owner, of the registered design professional, sorry. And there should also be no conflicts of interest on behalf of the peer reviewer. Next slide. The peer reviewer has to submit a report to us, to OTCR, and of course would submit the report to the registered design professional as well. The report has to just make sure that the performance data obtained from the UL 9540A is incorporated into the design of the system. So if the system has been tested and it shows that there is a significant release of flammable gases and the design of the system does not have any deflagration considerations, then the peer reviewer, of course, would note that, and of course, the registered design professional would need to take steps to correct those conditions. The peer reviewer is also going to report on conditions prescribed in the 9540 listing, making sure that those conditions are incorporated into the design. And if there's any applicable requirements from the codes, the peer reviewer is also looking to make sure that that is coordinated. Next slide, please. This is an important slide. I just wanted to highlight the divisions of responsibility for the peer reviewer. The peer reviewer does not take on the responsibility of the design of the system. That responsibility still lies with the registered design professional who will be filing with the department. So that is important. The peer reviewer is only providing their opinion regarding the design of the system. Okay, next slide. That concludes the presentation on the OTCR process for filing an energy storage system. I'm looking at the time and I'm not sure if there is time for questions. Lori, I will leave that to you. but certainly if there is not time for questions, I will certainly take any questions that are submitted to me and provide responses at a later date.
Thank you, Alan, for the great presentation, and all the detail is greatly appreciated. There are lots of questions, but we are out of time for this particular segment. So we're going to keep things moving. Thank you once again to both Barry and to Alan and to the entire New York City Department of Buildings for all their efforts and working with us day in and day out. So we really very much appreciate it. We will pass along the questions to you both. Thank you. And now we're going to move on. I'd like to introduce Claudia Viller-Lehman. She is the Energy Policy Advisor for the Mayor's Office of Sustainability. TRIA case formed the New York City Solar Partnership way back in 2016, partnering with 2006, sorry, partnering with the Mayor's Office of Sustainability. And we very much appreciate all of their support and expertise as well. Claudia, thank you for your time and for joining us.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep, you've got the floor.
Excellent. Thanks so much to the whole CUNY team for organizing this event, and to all my fellow panelists for your great presentations today. As Lori mentioned, I'm Claudia Villar-Lehman. I'm an energy policy advisor at the Mayor's Offices of Sustainability and Resiliency. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how New York City is advancing policy that will maximize solar and storage's contributions to our city's just energy transition. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Great. So as many of you are probably aware, the city has committed to achieving carbon neutrality by 2050, which includes 100% clean electricity by 2040. We know we need to do that while maintaining a reliable and resilient energy system, even as we see intensifying impacts of climate change, and we're bringing more intermittent renewables onto the grid. And then, of course, we need to do all of that while making costs affordable for all New Yorkers and prioritizing an equitable energy transition. Next slide. Great. So I know we've been in the permitting weeds for much of the day, so I'll zoom out a little bit here and start bigger picture with a quick background on the New York City grid. So New York City is densely populated. We use about the same amount of electricity as the entire state of Massachusetts, which has a similar number of people in about 35 times the amount of space. So we need a lot of electricity either brought into or generated in a pretty small area, and we need 100% of it to come from renewables by 2040 at the latest. So that's, of course, a significant challenge, and there's no way we can do that without a lot of rooftop solar to reduce building energy demand from the grid, and a lot of energy storage to facilitate the integration of solar and wind at scale. Next slide. So this month, April, Indian Point Nuclear Center's last remaining unit came offline. So most of that capacity was replaced by fossil fuels, and you can see here the impact of that. In 2018, we were about 2/3 dependent on fossil fuels for our electricity. And next year, the first full year without Indian Point, we're expecting to be about 86% dependent. Obviously, that poses concerns not only for the climate, but also for health and reliability, because as you'll see on the next slide, we rely on 24 mostly old, mostly dirty power plants across the city that run on natural gas and or fuel oil. New York City is required by the state to have in-city capacity to meet reliability requirements. And in 2021, that requirement is that we must be able to generate at least about 80% of our electricity within city borders. And the plants that we rely on to meet that requirement are mostly over 50 years old. They're pretty heavily polluting, and they cause air quality and health issues, as well as being more expensive than other sources of generation. And they also have some reliability concerns given their advanced age. So transitioning away from these plants towards cleaner sources of energy that are sited in or directly connected to Zone J, New York City, like solar, wind, and storage, are definitely a top priority for the city. Next slide, please. The city is, oh, one back. Yeah, perfect. The city is also excited about the potential for solar and storage to support our resiliency efforts. So New York City has almost 600 miles of coastline, which is more than the coastlines of Miami, Boston, LA, and San Francisco combined. So we're uniquely vulnerable to coastal storms like Hurricane Sandy, which devastated a lot of low-lying neighborhoods and damaged a lot of energy systems equipment, like what is shown here. That's the LIPA Arvern substation in the Rockaways. And of course, it doesn't stop at storm surge. New York City is also vulnerable to other climate impacts like extreme heat, high wind events like Hurricane Isaias, intense precipitation, and other impacts that can stress the grid and lead to power outages. So we're really excited about the potential of solar and storage to provide resiliency benefits to communities and critical facilities in the event of an outage, as we're continuing to face these increasing impacts of climate change. Next slide. So I talked a little bit about how solar and storage can support sustainability and resiliency. Also want to really stress the importance of solar and storage in increasing affordability for our energy system. So today, too many New Yorkers are currently known as what we call energy cost burdened, which means they pay more than 6% of their income on utility bills. And here you can see a map which illustrates energy cost burden in New York City. The bigger the circle means the more people are living close to poverty, and the darker the purple means that they're paying higher energy bills. So you can see that energy cost burden is particularly heavy in the Bronx and low-income neighborhoods in the outer boroughs. Next slide. Great, so the last sort of pillar, in addition to sustainability, resiliency, affordability, the last pillar is equity. So we want to underscore the role that solar and storage can and must play in an equitable energy transition. Environmental justice needs to be central to our energy transition, and that's actually codified in local law. So for far too long, low-income communities and communities of color have experienced a disproportionate share of poor environmental outcomes, and they're also now most vulnerable to a rapidly changing climate. So as we're working towards our long-term energy goals, including deploying solar and storage at scale, we need to really be prioritizing access and inclusion in planning and decision-making, as well as prioritizing health outcomes in environmental justice neighborhoods and designing solar and storage to maximize environmental and economic benefits for historically overburdened communities. Next slide. Great. So all of that to say, the city strongly supports solar and storage deployment and is working towards some ambitious goals. We have targeted 1 gigawatt of solar by 2030 and 500 megawatts of storage by 2025. And on the next slide, there's a couple of policy initiatives that are underway to support solar and storage development. The first group there is some local laws that you've probably all heard of by now that were part of the Climate Mobilization Act of 2019. I will touch on them briefly. I know some of the other presentations before me also touched on them, so I won't spend too long on that. And then I'll really focus on these 5 other solar and storage policy initiatives that are currently underway, which are the Solar Community Credit Petition, some zoning reform relating to storage, property tax abatements available for bulk storage. I know we heard a little bit about that for solar, so I'll talk about them on the storage side. A community energy planning tool that can help site renewables in priority neighborhoods, as well as what the city is doing to lead by example and install solar and storage on city-owned land. So jumping right in on the next slide. Great, so starting off with the sustainable roofing requirements, Local Laws 9294. They now represent the strongest sustainable roofing policy in North America. And as other presenters mentioned, it basically mandates that new buildings, any buildings adding vertical or horizontal extensions, or buildings doing a full decking or assembly replacement need to use all available roof space for solar, a green roof, or both. And the law definitely encourages doing both. There's also other benefits for putting green roofs underneath solar, like increasing panel efficiency and also maximizing the energy savings of the buildings. By 2030, we expect the policy to contribute 300 megawatts of new solar capacity, so a significant part of getting us towards our 1 gigawatt goal, as well as providing a lot of stormwater management capacity, greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and providing hundreds of green jobs. Next slide. So here we have PACE financing, Local Law 96. This offers long-term, low-cost debt to commercial, multifamily, and industrial building owners. So the way this works is the building owner can take out the loan from a pre-qualified PACE lender and perform energy conservation measures and then pay that back via the property tax bills. And the savings from the energy conservation measures can basically cover the cost of the loan. Eligible expenses include project soft costs like permitting, engineering studies, environmental review, legal closing fees, as well as energy efficiency measures for retrofits and renewables on both retrofits and new buildings. So one example is that it could help pay for a solar array either owned by the building owner, or it could be used to prepay a power purchase agreement for a solar array that's located on a building but owned by a third party. Two important things to note about PACE is that the loan sticks with the property even if the owner sells it. And even if a property is tax exempt, they're still able to access PACE. So we're really excited about the opportunity that Commercial PACE has to unlock solar and storage projects on larger buildings citywide. The program's administered by NYSEG, and we're hoping it's going to launch this spring. So the contract is currently with the New York City Comptroller as of April 21st. And hopefully it will be approved and launched within 30 days. So keep an eye out for that. Next slide. So here's the centerpiece of the Climate Mobilization Act, Local Law 97. That sets strict emissions caps for buildings greater than 25,000 square feet. And the limits get more stringent over time. So they first come into effect in 2024 and then ratchet down by 2030. Non-compliance results in significant fines. So $268 per ton of CO2 equivalent. So pretty hefty fine if you don't comply. And there are some exceptions. So for example, affordable housing has an alternative path, and that's currently being determined in rulemaking. So compliance is not prescriptive, and strategies can include a range of measures and technologies. And of course, want to emphasize here the role that solar and storage can play in helping building owners comply with Local Law 97. There's a couple of different pathways that solar and storage can contribute. The first is direct energy reduction. So for example, a behind the meter project could directly reduce a building's energy consumption from the grid. A second option is a capacity credit. So that, for example, a front of the meter project that technically doesn't reduce a building owner's direct energy consumption, but can still provide grid and community services. This incentive, the capacity credit, was basically written into the law to make sure that buildings are compensated for hosting front of the meter resources. And then the third option is a renewable energy credit. So Zone J RECs are an option. These could potentially interest building owners, for example, who are subscribing to a community solar array, or for some other reason, may be more interested in getting the Local Law 97 compliance than getting the E value through the value stack. Just wanted to flag here that the time of use rules are still under development. I know we've been getting a lot of questions about that. There is a lot of opportunity here to maximize the value of solar and storage in the Local Law 97 compliance process. So there has been a lot of discussion on this in the DOB working groups. The process is still being set up, but there are a lot of people who are focused on getting it right. So definitely stay tuned for updates on that front. Next slide. Great, so those are the Climate Mobilization Act laws that I wanted to touch on. Now I'll dive into some of the other policy initiatives, starting with the Con Edison Community Credit, which is mandated by the PSC and really reflects the value that community solar brings to New York City. As of March, Con Ed reported that 312 of the 350 megawatts available through the community credit have already been reserved, and the remainder might be taken up in a matter of months. So last month, the city partnered with a bunch of other organizations to petition the PSC to address this issue. And we asked that 180 megawatts be added to the community credit capacity. And we chose 180 megawatts because that's about the amount of community credit capacity that was taken up by fuel cells that run on fossil fuels early on in the process. They were able to do that via a loophole that allowed them to participate. So we've asked that the PSC restore that capacity for renewable energy projects in the immediate term. And then in the long term, we ask that NYSERD and DPS work with stakeholders like you to identify longer term solutions that can support the industry while limiting ratepayer impacts. So we encourage you to read this petition. We wanted to let you know about it. You're welcome to submit comments. The deadline is June 21st. And we have some links to the petition included in this slide deck, which will be posted on CUNY's website after today. And of course, feel free to reach out with any questions or concerns. Next slide. All right, now I'm going to touch on an effort currently in the works, which is to address the zoning challenges that some energy storage projects have faced during the permitting process. And the Department of City Planning and Department of Buildings have been hard at work on that. For those who are less familiar with how zoning goes through those agencies, the Department of City Planning is basically the agency that develops the zoning regulations, and then the Department of Buildings interprets and enforces them. So DCP and DOB have been working together with industry to provide more guidance on when and how energy storage installations will be impacted by zoning. So here you can see the three main ways that we can think about energy storage siting in New York City. The first is permitted use as of right. So the DOB Buildings Bulletin 2019-007 clarified the districts in which standalone storage would be allowed as permitted use as of right. And that's generally speaking commercial and manufacturing districts, which on the map here is shown in green. Then there's discretionary use. So for those projects that are not allowed as of right, they need to get special use permits from the City Planning Commission or the Board of Standards and Appeals. So for example, a really giant battery in a commercial district, if it's not allowed as of right, might need to get a special use permit and would be discretionary use. Then you've got this third bucket, which is accessory use. So that's defined as incidental to and customarily found in connection with the principal use, which basically means that though this equipment or use type might not normally be allowed in, say, a residential zone, because it supports the primary use of the building on which it's sited or the zoning law on which it's sited, it therefore would be allowed. So when it comes to energy storage, this has been particularly tricky because you could, for example, have a front of the meter energy storage system that is directly connected to the grid, but small enough that maybe it should be considered accessory use, but it, defining whether or not that is in connection with the principal use was tricky. So DOB and DCP have been working hard to clarify that. And last December, they published a buildings bulletin that does just that. On the next slide, that's bulletin 2020-023. So that actually defines accessory use for batteries, not on the use case or whether it's behind the meter or front of the meter, but solely on the size of the battery in relation to the maximum electrical load of the zoning lot. So it says that you can have a 10-hour storage capacity for the maximum load of the lot. So one example is that if a given zoning lot has a peak load of 20 kilowatts, you could then multiply that by the 10-hour storage capacity laid out in the buildings bulletin, and that would get you a 200 kilowatt hour battery. So a battery 200 kilowatt hours or less would be considered accessory use on that zoning lot. And so ultimately, this bulletin is going to open up more residential or commercial districts for citing small and medium batteries as accessory use in those places without having to go through the discretionary use special permitting pathway. So that's really exciting. The bulletin also notes that the battery cited within the bulk envelope of a building can be considered floor space used for mechanical equipment. So it would basically be treated like HVAC equipment and would not count towards floor area. And as you probably know, the zoning resolution lays out which districts are allowed to treat mechanical equipment as a permitted obstruction within the bulk envelope. And in those districts where ESS can be considered a permitted obstruction, rooftop storage systems would be allowed to exceed the maximum height limit of the zoning district. So it makes it simpler for some rooftop systems. In yards, courts, and open spaces, the zoning resolution also dictates where accessory mechanical equipment can be treated as a permitted obstruction outdoors. Currently, this is primarily only in flood zone districts due to a legacy change to the resolution after Hurricane Sandy. So an effort is actually underway to change the zoning resolution so that accessory mechanical equipment is not just allowed as a permitted obstruction in flood zone districts, but instead allowed citywide. So on the next slide, you'll see that proposal, which is called the Zoning for Coastal Flood Resiliency. And that's a massive proposal that would change many things about the zoning resolution, most of them not related to energy storage, but generally change the resolution to make it more conducive to resiliency planning in a number of different ways. So one small piece of this is energy storage systems, and it would specifically allow accessory energy storage to be treated as a permitted obstruction in required open space citywide, rather than just in flood zone districts, which again is how it is now. There are some constraints. So for example, in residential districts, the footprint of the battery, the accessory battery, would not be allowed to exceed a quarter of the required open space, but for something like a power wall or something, that wouldn't be an issue. The height can't exceed 10 feet above adjoining grade in R1 through 5 districts, or 15 feet above adjoining grade in R6 through 10 districts. And in commercial and manufacturing district, the height limit is 23 feet above curb level. Generally, the systems must be installed above the design flood elevation and must be enclosed or screened by vegetation, with some exceptions for single or two-family residences. So again, this is still in proposal form. It hasn't passed yet, but it is going through the ULURP Uniform Land Use Review process now, and it seems to be on track to passing within the next few months. So very exciting. Keep an eye out for updates, and it will definitely make it a lot easier to site accessory use batteries citywide. Next slide. Wonderful. So our third policy initiative that I want to talk about today is relating to tax benefits. So I know Barry talked a bunch about tax abatement opportunities for solar. I'll talk briefly about some opportunities for large scale storage. So the New York State Real Property Tax Law 487 offers a 15-year tax abatement on real properties that see an increase in their property value due to the installation of an energy system like solar or storage. I think microhydro, wind, and fuel cells are also included in the law. So the New York City Department of Finance is currently reviewing bulk energy storage projects on a case-by-case basis and hasn't declared whether or not certain components of an energy storage system, such as the battery cells themselves, would be treated as real property. And of course, that can significantly impact the finances of a bulk energy storage project, particularly if its useful life extends beyond the 15 years in which they'd receive the 487 benefits. So luckily, the New York City IDA, Industrial Development Agency, which is an arm of New York City EDC, Economic Development Corporation, the New York City IDA offers several tax abatement programs, including for property tax up to 25 years, as well as mortgage recording tax and sales tax exemptions. These abatements are granted on a case-by-case basis based on the financial need of the project and the benefits it would bring to the city in terms of meeting our economic and climate policy goals. A recent project that's on track to receive the IDA tax benefits, you may have heard of the 100 megawatt battery going up in Astoria, being developed by 174 Power Global as part of Con Edison's bulk solicitation. That project just got approved yesterday by the IDA board, and it's just one example of how the IDA could be structured, which is to mirror the 487 abatement for the first 15 years of the deal, and then continue that through year 25, functionally extending 487 from 15 to 25 years. So would definitely encourage developers interested in building bulk storage in New York City to reach out to the IDA. Their email's listed here to see if their incentives might make sense for your company. Next slide. I wanted to make you all aware of a community energy planning tool. It's a mapping tool that was launched by our office and is designed to help city planners and project developers like yourselves, or building owners, community advocates, gain a better understanding of local clean energy resources, the feasibility of community scale renewable energy installations, and really identify opportunities for equitable investments in frontline communities. On the next slide, there's a couple of screenshots of the tool in action. So you'll see here there are 6 tabs at the top of the tool. The second tab is technical feasibility, which looks at the potential for solar, wind, ground, and water source heat pumps for community scales installations at the block level across the city. I know in this image, it looks like more of a district level, but as you zoom in on the tool, it goes to the block level. On the next slide, you can see how other indicators can overlay onto the technical feasibility tool. So here, for example, is the environmental justice tab, where you see key social indicators such as energy cost burden, which we talked a little bit about, asthma hospitalizations, as well as unemployment. And it really shows where renewable energy projects can have the greatest positive environmental justice impacts. So in this case, we're zoomed in on Brooklyn and Queens, and you can see which areas have the highest energy cost burden, which is the darkest blue. And then overlaid on top of that is highest solar potential in red. So you can really identify where, for example, a community solar development might have the greatest potential for serving vulnerable New York City communities. So definitely encourage you to check out that tool. The slides will be circulated, but there's also just the URL on the slide there. It was tinyurl.com/NYC Energy Map. So definitely encourage you to check that out. Great, sorry, next slide. And then finally, I want to close by just highlighting some ongoing work to install solar and storage on city-owned buildings and lots. It's a part of an effort to help jumpstart the market, as well as reduce city government's own carbon footprint. And that includes a commitment to 100 megawatts of solar on city-owned buildings by 2025. This effort is managed by the New York City Department of Citywide Administrative Services, or DCAS, in partnership with other agencies. So there's a ton of solar and storage projects already completed, with many more in the pipeline. I wanted to start here by just highlighting that DCAS really led the way for battery storage in New York City with the installation of the Jacoby Hospital battery back in 2017. That was a 400 kilowatt hour battery, flow battery, designed for peak load shaving, and was the first flow battery installed in any hospital in the world. DCAS is also leading 10 solar and storage resiliency projects currently in the works. 6 of those are at FDNY firehouses and 4 are at Brooklyn Public Library sites. And together they total over 500 kilowatt hours of storage and 160 kilowatts of solar. And they're already either in construction or commencing construction later this summer. So keep an eye out for that announcement. The New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA, also, sorry, what back? Yeah, thanks. The New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA, recently announced substantial completion of 1.8 megawatts of rooftop solar arrays on 27 buildings across the Queensbridge houses, which is a really exciting first step towards their commitment to hosting 25 megawatts of solar by 2025. And that's currently the largest community shared solar project in the city. There's also the community solar project in Sunset Park, which is a really exciting example of how solar can not only help us achieve our decarbonization goals, but also our affordability and equity goals, as that is a system almost 700 kilowatts that's owned and operated by a cooperative for the benefit of local residents and businesses. Sorry. And then finally, the screenshot here is the March 2021 announcement made by the city in partnership with NYPA that's committing to the installation of rooftop solar on 47 public schools across the 5 boroughs, as well as a handful of wastewater treatment plants. And that'll be as much as 22 megawatts of power during peak output. And a bunch of those facilities are also going to have storage on them as well. Finally, just the last thing to highlight here is that DCAS is nearing completion of a citywide energy storage study. So that evaluates the entire portfolio of city-owned property to identify the most relevant facilities for energy storage. And that's going to result in an actionable path forward to advance energy storage projects on city property. So that study's wrapping up in the next week or two and is probably going to result in more RFPs and opportunities to site projects on city land. So developers can keep an eye out for that. And then the last slide, you can now go forward, thank you, is just highlighting a recent report that the city put out in collaboration with our utilities, Con Ed and National Grid, which examines technical pathways to decarbonize our energy system and really illustrates the contributions of solar for our transition and underscores the need for very large amounts of energy storage to facilitate the integration of intermittent renewables at scale and provide dispatchable capacity for a decarbonized grid. So one slide more, I have some useful links there so that when you download the slides on the CUNY website, you can get some more information for some of the resources I mentioned. And the next slide is my email address. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And thanks again for your work bringing solar and storage to New York City. We're definitely looking forward to doubling down on those targets with you and accelerating progress. And thanks again to CUNY for having me. I'll hand it back to Tria Case of Sustainable CUNY. Thanks.
Thanks, Claudia. Thank you, everybody, for all of those presentations. You know, it's been quite a few years that we've been running this event with Con Edison, and I feel like the transition to this web-based event has been surprisingly smooth. So I also want to thank the entire Sustainable CUNY team, you know, Ron Reisman and Emily Sweeney and John and Lori. Great work, so you know, helping everybody to make this happen as smoothly as it has. So thank you. You know, when we first started working in the solar arena in the city, it took a lot of conversation with all of you, all of the stakeholders, to think about what needed to be built in order to make for a transparent process. And you know, the team at DOB and FDNY and the mayor's office and Con Edison have all been such amazing partners over the year to help us think about what we can all be doing to realize our solar and now our battery storage potential in the city. It's really an amazing group of people, and I feel lucky to be working with all of you. I think when just listening to Claudia talk about the community energy planning tool and about NYCHA, when we started, one of the things that everybody talked about was being able to understand our solar potential and having a place to go in order to get information. And I think the solar map has been such a great tool to help us with that. The tool was used to help assess the solar potential at NYCHA, and now our team has been helping NYCHA to you know, manage and implement that program. And the back end of the solar map is in part what feeds the community energy planning tool. So the work we all put in together to make that happen is also going forward, helping us to build the tools that we need today. So I encourage everybody to become, if you're not already, members of the roundtable, DG Hub Roundtable, NYC Solar Roundtable, and to reach out to us at smartdghub@cuny.edu. If you have any thoughts, you know, if you have questions, I hope you all know the Ombudsman and that you reach out to them. You know, we're here every day to help think about ways that we can be, you know, moving these markets and realizing our potential. So with that and seeing the time and all of you staying with us throughout the afternoon, I thank you and encourage you always to reach out to us. And yeah, so, and Daniela, I forgot to say Daniela as well. Thank you. You know, stay tuned, more to come. As we said, there's going to be a COA webinar coming up. But again, any ideas that you have that you think that, you know, we should be focusing on, reach out to us. Thank you again. And thanks Con Ed for partnering with us to have another successful year. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.